In his past life, he was a king among special forces operatives, but he tragically fell from a cliff while pursuing criminals at the border. Upon opening his eyes once more, he found himself surrounded by women clad in animal skins. However, an excruciating pain radiating from his foot left him no time for contemplation. Drawing upon his years of survival experience in the wilderness as a special forces soldier, he quickly identified the wound on his foot as a snake bite. Without hesitation, he grabbed a stone knife nearby to lacerate the wound, then used a red-hot branch to cauterize the area. After a harrowing scream, he collapsed to the ground, exhausted, hoping only that the intense heat would neutralize the serpent's venom. Having struggled through a night between life and death, he rose on the second day with the resilience of a cockroach. He accepted a piece of dried meat from a woman and devoured it ravenously. Once finished, he gestured wildly, demanding more. But the woman's answer was naturally a firm refusal. After all, within this small tribe of barely 50 people, the daily supply of food was strictly limited. Furthermore, with the harvest season approaching before the arrival of winter, provisions were prioritized for the strongest laborers. Seeing this, he realized he would have to find a way to fill his own stomach. As the weather grew colder by the day, he knew he had to find a way to stockpile food for the coming winter. After much deliberation, he concluded that fish were the easiest source of sustenance to acquire. Less than 1,000 meters away flowed a small river, but the tribe members did not consume fish, and thus possessed no fishing tools. With this realization, he set out to gather vines, intending to weave a basket to scoop fish from the water. Before long, he returned to the cave entrance carrying a large bundle of vines. He began the task of crafting the basket. A group of children gathered around to watch him with curiosity, their mouths emitting strange, guttural sounds as they had not yet learned to speak. Meanwhile, the women nearby were busy drying thatch grass close to the cave. At that precise moment, a terrified shriek echoed from the distance. The whiskered tribal chief and 2 other men appeared, each clutching a colossal bird egg. They fled in a panic, shouting at the top of their lungs. Simultaneously, a piercing screech tore through the air as a peacock, standing over 3 meters tall, gave chase, hot on the heels of the chief. He shouted at the top of his voice, urging them to discard the eggs immediately. Alas, no one understood him. The chief refused to release the egg in his grip, and the giant bird refused to abandon its pursuit. Within moments, the chief was overtaken. A single peck from the bird was enough to end his life on the spot. The 2 men accompanying him saw this and hurriedly cast aside their eggs, turning to flee toward the edge of the forest where they scrambled up the trees. By doing so, they narrowly escaped death. The children beside him had never witnessed such a terrifying sight. They immediately began to scream in terror. Having lost its target, the peacock turned its gaze and lunged directly toward the wailing children near the cave. Sensing the danger, he rushed to usher the children into the safety of the cave. The women inside quickly shoved a large, round boulder into place, sealing the cave entrance tight. The peacock, unable to squeeze through the opening, turned away and approached the corpse of the tribe leader. It began to tear into the remains, feeding upon the body. Yanzhuo realized he had to neutralize this peacock. Having tasted human flesh and now aware of the tribe's location, it would surely bring endless calamity to their people in the future. Yet, he possessed no weapons, and a direct confrontation would undoubtedly be a death sentence. Just then, his eyes fell upon the creature's long, spindly legs. A sudden realization dawned on him, and he immediately set his plan into motion. First, he found 2 stones the size of his fists, then unwound the snakeskin rope from his waist and secured a stone to each end. With his makeshift sling prepared, he squeezed through the narrow gap in the cave entrance and stepped outside. Those inside the cave were stunned and moved to pull him back, but fearing that any commotion might draw the peacock's attention, they could only watch with bated breath, reduced to helpless spectators. He hid silently within the thicket, stooping low as he advanced. He halted only when he was approximately 50 or 60 meters from the peacock. The beast remained blissfully occupied with its gruesome meal. It had no inkling of the hunter waiting in the shadows. Yanzhuo rose slowly, gripping the center of the snakeskin rope. He began to swing the sling with increasing velocity. The stones whistled through the air as they gained momentum. Driven by centrifugal force, the rope pulled taut. Alerted by the sound, the peacock lifted its head, let out a piercing shriek, and charged toward him with primal fury. As it closed the distance, the women and children at the cave entrance shrieked in terror, but Yanzhuo remained unmoved, steady as a mountain. Just as the beast lunged to within 30 meters, he whipped the sling toward it. The weapon flew through the air, spinning violently. Upon striking the peacock's long legs, it instantly coiled and tightened around them. Only 10 meters from him, the momentum sent the peacock tumbling, its balance shattered as it crashed into the earth. Its wings thrashed frantically in the dust, but it was unable to regain its footing. The women and children at the cave entrance stood frozen, their mouths agape in utter disbelief at the display. Yanzhuo immediately signaled 2 boys. One rushed forward to pin the beast's neck while Yanzhuo hoisted a heavy boulder, slamming it down with devastating force. Blood erupted from the peacock's head like a fountain. Its body shuddered, went limp, and finally fell still. As the 2 boys looked toward him, their eyes were filled with profound reverence. Yanzhuo unwound the snakeskin rope from the beast's legs and retied it around his waist, then gestured for the pair to help him haul the carcass back to the cave. Now entirely compliant, the boys hovered near him like loyal subordinates. The 3 of them combined their strength to drag the massive creature toward the cavern. Seeing the trio return with such a substantial prize, the rest of the tribe could no longer remain idle. They erupted in shouts and pushed aside the massive stone barrier, rushing out from the cave to assist. The two grown men who had been concealing themselves in a nearby tree finally descended. They had witnessed the entire process of him hunting the peacock alone, and they were filled with immense admiration for him. It was the first time in the history of their tribe that such a large prey had been captured. Upon returning to the cave, he instructed the women to keep the feathers for him, leaving the rest for them to process as they saw fit. With the danger now resolved, he had to return to weaving his baskets. About an hour later, 2 baskets were completed. He filled the baskets with some of the peacock's entrails and headed toward the riverbank. On the way, a woman who saw him intending to head to the river alone decided to follow him. In her heart, she believed he was incredibly formidable, so she felt it necessary to keep a close eye on him. As for the 2 boys who had just accepted him as their leader, seeing him fashion another strange object and head out, they immediately gave chase. The 4 of them quickly arrived at the riverbank. He stood on the bank and carefully observed the water for a moment, but the more he looked, the more alarmed he became. In just a few short minutes, he had witnessed several instances of larger fish devouring smaller ones. This river actually harbored carnivorous species, yet it had to be acknowledged that the ecological environment here was truly exceptional. The river water was so clear one could see to the bottom, and the population of fish was abundant. Selecting a strategic position, he gripped the grass rope attached to the basket and lowered it into the river. The fishy scent of the meat quickly diffused through the water, stirring the fish within a 20-meter radius, who rapidly swarmed toward him. They crowded into the basket in a frenzy to compete for the entrails. With a sudden motion, he hauled the basket out of the water. Aside from those that managed to escape, 4 large fish remained in the basket. Even then, the fish in the river did not flee. Instead, they gathered in schools below to continue fighting over the scraps. This gave him the surreal feeling of feeding ornamental fish in a park. Both the 2 children and the woman were deeply astonished. They realized that by simply placing that strange contraption into the water and lifting it, one could catch these creatures that lacked legs. Yet they still did not understand the purpose of catching them. After he carefully processed the 4 fish on the ground, he sliced off a piece of sashimi and placed it into his mouth. Seeing him consume the sashimi with apparent satisfaction, they immediately understood that this was a source of food. Thus they imitated him, slicing off pieces and placing them into their mouths. The woman's eyes brightened instantly. She realized at once that this was a new food source. She began gesturing and vocalizing, asking him to teach her the method for catching these fish. However, he did not let her handle the task, assigning her and one of the children to. The remaining child used a grass rope to string together the cleaned fish, hanging them from a wooden pole to be carried back to the tribe later, while he continued to scoop up more fish. Now that the fish had gathered in one spot, he crouched by the water's edge and began scooping them up with a basket. Every strike brought in a significant harvest. The 4 of them worked throughout the afternoon, eventually securing over 200 fish, with the largest weighing nearly 10 pounds. Since the 3 of them could not possibly carry the entire catch, they had no choice but to send one child back to summon the older ones for assistance. Finally, the entire group headed back toward the cave, carrying their heavy burden in a boisterous procession. By this time, the foraging and hunting parties had already returned. Lacking proper tools, the prey captured by the adults consisted only of small game, such as rabbits and wildfowl. Just then, the children returned to the cave with the fish, shouting and boasting to the adults about their success. Originally, the adults were still somber following the death of their chieftain, but upon witnessing the fruits of his labor, their expression shifted instantly. The tragedy of the chieftain was cast to the back of their minds. After processing the day's catch, every member of the tribe gathered outside the cave. A massive pyre of firewood was stacked in the clearing before the entrance. The body of the chieftain was placed upon it. An elder wearing 2 goat horns upon his head ignited the wood. The flames erupted with intensity, quickly consuming the chieftain's remains. The firelight flickered across the faces of everyone present. The children, catching the scent of roasting meat, swallowed their saliva. They felt no true sorrow. The adults, bolstered by this new source of food, looked on with calm countenances, and he took this opportunity to observe the tribe. The tribe currently consisted of 52 people, 8 adult men, 15 adult women, and the remainder were children of various ages. Among them, the one who ignited the pyre was the tribe's elder. As the eldest, he had been regarded as the wisest, though perhaps he now held only the second position, for he was gradually usurping that status in the hearts of the people. There was also a man with 6 fingers, whose preferred weapon was a wooden staff. Perhaps due to inbreeding, he did not appear to be particularly intelligent. Beside the 6-fingered man was a fellow wearing a necklace of feathers. This man appeared quite sharp, and like the 6-fingered man, he favored the wooden staff. Following behind the feather-clad man was Stone, who wore a necklace of bones. His weapon of choice was a rock. A short distance from them stood a youth of 15 years. This man possessed only 1 ear, and 4 deep scars marred his left cheek. His weapon was a spear fashioned from a sharpened, perfectly straight femur. Beside Duni was the 17-year-old Shuya, whose father had been a previous chieftain of the tribe, and his weapon of choice consisted of 2 saber-toothed tiger fangs, each over a cubit in length. Then there was Dali, the tallest member of the entire tribe. Possessing a formidable physique, his weapon was as crude as it was brutal, a massive thigh bone. The final member was a man who walked with a limp, leaning upon a wooden staff. He now followed the foraging party, tasked specifically with scouting the path ahead and standing guard, and he possessed a particular passion for grinding stone tools. It was said that his greatest ambition in life was to successfully hone a perfect stone slab. In essence, among all the tribe members, Duni, Shuya, and Dali were considered the premier warriors of the tribe. By the time the chieftain's cremation was complete, darkness had fully descended. Led by the elder, the people retreated into the cave to begin the distribution of food. As the tribe had never before consumed fish, he was granted the honor of overseeing the distribution today. He took a pre-roasted fish to demonstrate how to eat it and properly remove the bones. The tribesmen followed his lead, devouring the meal with great satisfaction. Perhaps because it was the first time they had eaten their fill, their joy grew with every bite, eventually breaking into song and dance as they ate. The scene unfolding before him filled him with a sudden profound sense of belonging, and he silently swore to lead this tribe toward a more prosperous future. Once the meal had concluded, the elder, adorned with goat horns upon his head, used a piece of charred stone to carve the image of him catching fish by the river onto the cave wall. Meanwhile, he spent his time teaching the women how to weave baskets, then added 2 vine straps to create a carrying frame. In this way, they would no longer need to rely solely on animal hides to transport fruit, thereby significantly increasing the efficiency of their foraging. The women were immediately enamored with the invention, taking turns wearing them and refusing to set them down. Eventually, they reached a consensus to gather more vines tomorrow so they could fashion their own. To express their gratitude, they took 2 deer hides from the foraging party and pressed them into his hands. From that moment on, he became the first child in the tribe to be clothed in animal hide. Yet he was not selfish, he kept only 1 hide for himself. He gave the remaining hide to the mothers of the toddlers, so they might fashion clothing for their children. One must understand that the constitution of young children is fragile, and in this primitive society there was no medical technology to speak of. Even a minor fever could claim the lives of those children. Therefore, it is no exaggeration to say that this piece of deer hide represented a life saved. He trusted that if he were ever in need of their assistance, they would certainly not be the type to bite the hand that fed them. The next day, he awoke at the first light of dawn. After completing a simple set of military exercises, he felt a dryness parching his throat. Yet, looking at the stone basin from which everyone drank, he found it difficult to bring himself to take a sip. It seemed the time had come to forge some proper vessels for water storage. Soon after, the members of the tribe emerged from their caves in a flurry of activity. However, they did not rush to hunt. Instead, the elder gathered all the men in the clearing before the cave entrance. It appeared they were to elect a new leader. He mused to himself that only by becoming the leader could he command the others. With that, he stepped forward to join the ranks of the candidates. The method for choosing the leader was remarkably simple and brutal. 2 men would face each other in unarmed combat, and the strongest would be declared the successor. Very quickly, Duer and Dali secured their respective victories. Watching them, he could not help but shake his head in frustration. There was no technique involved, only the primitive clash of brute strength. Before long, it was time for the match between Duer and Dali, the latter standing at nearly 2 meters tall, looming like an iron tower. For a moment, Duer hesitated, unsure of where to strike, but he did not falter. Instead, he let out a roar and launched the first attack. Unexpectedly, as soon as he drew near, Dali grabbed him firmly by both shoulders. Before he could react, he was flung several meters away. With a heavy thud, he struck the ground, unable to rise for a long time. Dali beat his chest triumphantly, and the tribe members cheered in excitement, signaling their acceptance of this new leader. At that exact moment, he stepped forward to stand before the giant. "I am next." Seeing a mere youth like him daring to challenge him, Dali pounded his chest and let out a furious roar, yet he did not show the slightest sign of intimidation, standing before Dali and assuming a combat stance. Dali looked down at the boy who reached only his chest, his eyes filled with confidence and utter disdain. The youngsters watching from the sidelines shouted their encouragement, and he did not hesitate. He lunged toward Dali with the speed of a striking viper, planting his left foot firmly on the giant's slightly flexed thigh to launch himself into the air, and delivered a precise knee strike directly to Dali's chin with his right leg. Before anyone could process what had happened, Dali collapsed, rolling on the ground and groaning in pain. Every tribesman present, one must understand that Dali was the strongest warrior in their tribe. Even in defeat, he should not have been struck down in a single heartbeat. Furthermore, his opponent was merely a youth who had not yet reached adulthood. The elder suddenly became deeply agitated. An unfounded yet intense premonition surged within his heart. Perhaps the entire tribe would grow increasingly formidable because of the child standing before them. Before he could even issue an order, the tribespeople lifted the boy high into the air, cheering in celebration of their new leader's emergence. In a mere 2 days, he had brought forth too many miracles for the tribe. In truth, this outcome was something everyone had secretly hoped for. By now, Dali had regained his senses, though it was clear he remained unconvinced of his loss. Amidst the bewildered cheers of the crowd, he lunged toward the boy once more. Seeing this, the boy performed a swift roll across the ground. As Dali closed the distance, the boy grabbed 2 of his fingers, exerting force to thrust him forward. Following this, he pivoted to maneuver behind Dali, delivering a powerful kick to the back of his leg. Dali collapsed face first onto the ground. The more he struggled, the greater his agony became. In less than 2 minutes, a man as robust as Dali was reduced to tears and snot, begging for mercy. Only then did the boy dust off his hands, releasing the weeping fool before turning to walk back into the ranks. The crowd erupted into chaos once more. The children cheered, celebrating the first time one of their own had defeated an adult. The women whispered amongst themselves about where they had seen rattan vines, planning to ask their leader to teach them how to weave more baskets that evening. As for the elder, he stared fixedly at the cave entrance with a complex gaze lost in deep contemplation. At that very moment, the boy reappeared before them, sporting an entirely new appearance. He was clad in a simple deer-hide garment. His long black hair was bound neatly with a vine tie. He looked clean, refreshed, and remarkably composed. This was a new aesthetic he had carefully considered. It is said that this style of attire originated during the Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty. Early farmers, finding loose hair inconvenient for their labor, began to bind it up. This eventually became one of the defining symbols of the agrarian Han people. Under the star-bright gazes of the tribe members, he stepped into the center of the crowd and began to organize the day's tasks. First, he adjusted the personnel of the foraging party. The tribe currently consisted of 15 adult women. 6 were pregnant, leaving 9, plus the man with the limp totaling 10 individuals. However, he only dispatched 8 women to forage today. Now that they possessed baskets, the man with the limp was no longer needed for protection. With each of them carrying a staff for self-defense, there would be no issues. 6 of the pregnant women remained within the shelter, taking the opportunity to tend to the toddlers of 2 or 3 years of age, while the older children were sent to pull weeds. The remaining woman led 2 young boys down to the river to catch fish. Now, everyone had a task to fulfill, save for the man with the limp, who had yet to be assigned a duty. Consequently, he appeared somewhat dejected. Regarding this man who had sworn to dedicate his entire life to carving a stone basin, the protagonist intended to place him in charge of pottery firing. However, firing pottery is no simple task. It requires extensive preparation, so he had to assign him other chores for the time being. The game caught yesterday had not yet been dried. In this climate without salt, the meat would quickly putrefy. Yet once smoked, it could be preserved for several years without spoilage. Thus, he demonstrated the process to the man with the limp once, then entrusted the entire task to him. As for himself, he scouted a level area in front of the cave and began excavating to construct a kiln. The structure of the kiln was divided into 3 levels from top to bottom. The bottom level served for ash collection and ventilation, the middle level for feeding the fire, and the top level for placing the pottery. After 3 or 4 hours of labor, the kiln was finally completed. However, the kiln remained damp and could not yet be utilized. He then summoned the 2 young companions from yesterday, directing them to place firewood into each level and ignite them, ensuring it would be ready for use by the afternoon. Once all arrangements were made, he personally ventured to the riverbank to select clay. He found a large rounded stone and flattened it to serve as a workbench, then brought the excavated clay back to be crushed and kneaded. Very quickly, the first small water vessel, featuring a narrow base and wide mouth, was completed. Following this, he crafted 4 more in the same fashion, placing them all beside the cave to dry. Next came several 2-handled earthen pots, dozens of ceramic bowls, and various small eating utensils. These items did not require aesthetic perfection. They only needed to be functional. At this moment, he could not be certain that these items would survive the firing process. How many would ultimately remain as finished goods? By mid-afternoon, he began placing all the semi-finished pieces into the kiln. The 2 young companions and the man with the limp stood nearby, watching intently without blinking. In just a single day, the leader had produced so many earthen vessels, though it remained to be seen if they were truly usable. He paid them no heed, sitting by the fire and tending to the fuel. Thus the time passed until twilight, when the tribesmen who had gone out returned to the tribe one by one. The women returned with a bountiful harvest. Their baskets were overflowing with wild fruits, along with large bundles of rattan vines, clearly gathered for weaving more containers. The men had also secured a significant haul for the day. They brought back 2 large birds resembling turkeys, a clutch of eggs, several bamboo rats, and over 100 fish caught earlier. The total harvest for the tribe was truly substantial. Any food that remained after the day's meal could be stored for later use. Seeing that several pregnant women were nearing their time, this surplus would ensure they were well provided for. Observing the pottery kiln begin to turn a pale white, he ceased adding firewood, allowing the fire to die out naturally so the contents could cool overnight. By tomorrow morning, the kiln would be ready to be opened. After a day of arduous labor, the tribesmen were weary, yet they gathered around the hearth with expressions of genuine contentment. At the very least, they no longer needed to fear the gnawing pangs of starvation. More importantly, he had prepared the 2 large birds using the beggar's chicken method. They had never tasted a dish of such exquisite quality. He, however, had little appetite. The dishes were seasoned with only a pinch of coarse salt, leaving them largely flavorless. Coarse salt was an incredibly precious resource, said to have been bartered from a neighboring tribe. He quietly calculated whether he might trade his pottery to acquire a larger supply. Once the meal concluded, the women returned to the cave to begin weaving their baskets. They had already realized how immensely useful the baskets truly were. Despite a smaller gathering party today, the harvest was greater, and he insisted on distributing all the game equally among the tribe. Even the children, who once huddled together for warmth, could now share in the comforts of blankets. Awakening the following morning, he immediately went to inspect the results of the firing. The limping man was the first to arrive, bringing the elder along with him. He spoke frantically to the elder, appearing visibly anxious. He himself felt a profound sense of apprehension, for his grand plan to trade for salt and his long-awaited dream of a warm meat broth all hinged upon this success. With his heart pounding like a drum, he removed the clay seal from the top of the kiln and peered inside, catching sight of a beautifully crafted vessel. A faint smile touched his lips as he began to retrieve the pottery. 4 earthenware pots and 4 small water jars had been fired perfectly, their surfaces smooth and free of any cracks. Of the 8 spoons, only 2 were successful. The rest had fused together in the intense heat. Out of more than 20 bowls, 12 remained intact and fully functional. As each piece of reddish-brown pottery emerged from the kiln, it brought not only shock to the tribesmen but a wave of immense excitement. Shuya and Dali were the swiftest. Each grabbed a jar and sprinted to the riverbank, returning in moments with fresh water. Though visibly stirred, the elder maintained his composure, gesturing and questioning. Before he could even speak, the 2 young companions who had assisted him yesterday scrambled to explain the situation to the elder on his behalf. Yet his primary concern remained: could they successfully trade for salt? He gestured to convey his query to the elder, only to be met with a look of utter disbelief as if he were a wayward spendthrift wasting a fortune. The elder pointed toward the various pottery items, large and small, and then gestured toward the men, women, and children of the tribe, using the local dialect to emphasize just how precious these goods truly were. Once he grasped the reality of the situation, he was struck with astonishment. Even a single bowl could be traded for a young man nearing adulthood or 2 young girls, let alone the value of the large water jars and earthen pots. Among the tribes of this era, water vessels were incredibly scarce. It was commonplace for one to spend their entire life carving a single stone basin. To acquire more water storage, some tribes would not hesitate to trade human lives. They believed that having too many people was useless, as they only consumed more food. However, he maintained that more people meant a greater capacity to gather food, not to mention strengthening the tribe's combat prowess. Furthermore, new members were essential to introducing fresh blood into the tribe. With these thoughts in mind, he immediately set forth the strategy for the trade mission. The elder and 7 members of the hunting party departed, carrying 1 water jar, 1 earthen pot, and 3 pottery bowls to exchange for people and salt. The water jar was to be traded for 2 mature women, the earthen pot for 2 boys nearing adulthood, and the 3 bowls were to be exchanged for all the salt they could carry. If salt was unavailable, the pottery bowls would be traded for young women instead. Once the instructions were finalized, the party set off immediately, while he remained behind to organize the day's tasks for the rest of the tribe. The trading site was located at a tribe to the west. After climbing a mountain and crossing a valley, the group quickly arrived at their destination. This tribe was slightly larger than his own, with a population of approximately 80 to 90 people. The 2 tribes had frequently exchanged goods in the past, and upon seeing the elders' party arrive with goods for trade, the bald chieftain of the neighboring tribe immediately came out to welcome them. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, the elder produced a pottery bowl from his pack and offered it to the chieftain in exchange for rock salt. The bald man's eyes lit up instantly. The bowl was polished smooth both inside and out, and it was significantly lighter than the cumbersome stone basins used by his own tribe. He signaled for 2 of his tribesmen to retrieve a small bag of rock salt and handed it to the elder. However, the elder took the bag, glanced at it, and shook his head. "We require more than this, and furthermore, we wish to trade for 2 mature women this time." Having said this, he instructed Dali to bring forth the large water jar. The bald man was momentarily stunned. The vessel was massive, promising a much greater capacity for water storage in the future. He hesitated for a moment, weighing the value. Exchanging 2 women for such a large stone-like vessel was undeniably a bargain. Yet it was the harvest season, and the loss of 2 laborers would inevitably lead to a decrease in their food supply. Ultimately, he smiled and agreed. After all, with fewer mouths to feed, does that not also reduce our consumption? This trade is far from balanced. A moment later, 2 frail women were brought forward. They were sisters, and the older one carried a boy named Chen Chong, who looked to be about 4 years old. The boy's eyes were closed and he remained motionless. It was evident at a glance that he was suffering from some ailment. "We will trade these 2 for your large stone basin. The boy will be included for free." The bald man waved his hand with a look of disdain, clearly eager for the women to be taken away. The elder looked at the 2 weak women and said nothing, then signaled to Shito to take out the remaining earthenware pot and ceramic bowls from the basket. "If you wish, you may trade for some of the young boys." However, since the bald leader had just acquired the large vat, he looked at the smaller pot with mild interest before waving his hand in refusal. Seeing this, the elder resorted to the method you taught us this morning, demonstrating on the spot how to use the earthenware pot to simmer a stew. Before long, the rich, savory aroma of meat wafted from the pot. The members of the opposing tribe swallowed hard. They had never realized that meat could be prepared in such a way. The bald leader, unable to contain his impatience, took a ceramic bowl from the elder's hand, which was filled with tender chunks of meat and broth. The man hesitated before tasting a piece, and his expression shifted to one of pure astonishment. "Heavens, this is beyond delicious." The savory broth was fragrant and rich, topped with a shimmering layer of fat, and as he bit into the succulent, tender meat, his entire body felt invigorated. What were a few children compared to this? "We will trade. We must trade." Now the bald man finally displayed some generosity. nodding readily and ordering his subordinates to bring out a large sack of rock salt, filling Dali's entire basket. Seeing this, the elder nodded in satisfaction. Shortly after, the group set off on their journey back with renewed vigor. They had departed as a party of 7, but after acquiring 9 more, they returned as a group of 16. This haul was far more rewarding than an entire day spent hunting. The group traveled in haste, eventually reaching their tribe as dusk began to fall. However, as the newly acquired members stepped into the clearing by the cave entrance, they were all struck dumb with amazement. Lined up before the cave were 4 large vats, several earthenware pots, and a stack of bowls that the cripple had finished firing just today. The cripple stood there, gazing at the pottery with a foolish wide grin. This was the happiest day of his life. In the clearing nearby, hundreds of large fish were hanging, drying in the air. The women nearby were laughing joyfully. This was all meat. They were finally capable of catching meat for themselves. Especially those who had just been traded for, both the adults and the children were left in a daze. One had to understand that a single stone basin was enough to trade for 2 adults, yet this tribe possessed such an abundance, and those hanging piles of meat, they were surely edible. It seemed that this tribe was not bad at all. The elder led the people forward to report their status to you. There were 8 people, stark naked, plus 1 child who was also completely bare. You narrowed your eyes, walking past each one of them. They were all skin and bones. One could tell at a glance that they were fragile. But it did not matter. There was no shortage of meat in the tribe, and after 1 winter, they could all be restored to health. Finally, you arrived before the woman cradling her child. The infant was motionless, its complexion dangerously flushed. You touched the child, who felt as scorching as a small furnace. You hurriedly pulled the woman into the cave and first found an animal skin to wrap around the mother and child. You had them sit by the fire to keep warm while you went to search for a bone fragment that could be used for scraping therapy. The massive beak of the giant bird was half a meter long. Breaking off a small shard was more than enough. The woman holding the child did not know what you intended to do, and seeing you touch her baby, she kept her brow furrowed. She was deeply anxious that you might discard her child, and at the thought of this, she could not help but shed tears. Just then, you walked up to her holding the beak fragment and said, "Give the child to me, I can save him." The woman did not fully understand your intentions, but she could sense that you treated her better than the previous leader ever did. Thus, she tremblingly placed the child into your arms. You used the bone shard to scrape the child's skin, leaving behind streaks of red. The delirious infant winced in pain, its mouth letting out soft whimpering cries. Not long after, you returned the child, now covered in red welts, to her and proceeded to feed the infant fish soup, spoonful by spoonful. The child, having been starved for who knows how long, swallowed the soup greedily the moment it touched its lips. You immediately let out a sigh of relief. If the child could eat, it could be saved. As long as you kept it warm enough to break into a sweat, this small life would be preserved. The woman also felt completely at ease. Although she did not know what you had done earlier, it clearly did not seem like you intended to harm her child. Once she relaxed, her stomach, which had been empty for 2 days, began to rumble loudly. Seeing the bowl of fish soup before her, she swallowed hard. You immediately scooped a bowl of soup along. He then took the infant from her arms, cradling the child against his chest and wrapping them securely in animal pelts. In this era, life was incredibly fragile. Even a minor fever could claim a soul. While the tribe's immediate need for food had been temporarily addressed, the lack of proper clothing remained a pressing concern. To stockpile a sufficient amount of furs, hunting larger beasts was an absolute necessity. However, with their current arsenal, such a feat was entirely impossible. He resolved that during future hunting expeditions, he would search for materials to craft weapons, or at the very least, construct traps. He swore to himself that before winter descended, he would ensure everyone possessed a set of clothes and that everyone would be fed. For the new tribe leader had not only saved her son's life, but had even personally styled her hair just like the others. This gesture signified that he had truly accepted her into their ranks. Once he had settled the affairs of the newcomers, he began to fashion equipment for himself. Selecting a branch that was relatively straight, he bound a spearhead polished from the leg bone of a giant bird to one end of the shaft. A primitive bone spear was thus brought into existence. Following this, he broke off several shards of the giant bird's beak, grinding them into a dagger, and entrusted the remaining materials to the limping man, instructing him to craft one for himself. With only these 2 pieces of equipment at his disposal, the burden of every task inevitably fell upon his shoulders. Early the next morning, once the tribe had awakened, he immediately delegated new assignments. The limping man was tasked with continuing the pottery work. It was vital to ensure that every individual possessed their own bowl. The adult women were divided into 2 groups, one to forage for wild fruits and the other to oversee the care of the remaining children. Those who remained would join the hunting party, which he would lead personally. The hunting squad consisted of all able-bodied members along with his 2 young companions, Dazui and Hozi. Together with the brothers Damao and Ermao, who had been brought into the tribe only yesterday, the group of 11 set out into the wilderness. After entering the forest, the hunting party dispersed. Each adult began to scout independently while he led his 4 young subordinates. They carried woven baskets and bundles of grass rope, ready to assist him in his objectives. The trees within this forest were primarily nut-bearing varieties, each towering over 30 meters in height. Gazing at trunks that measured over a meter in diameter, even he could only sigh at the impossibility of harvesting them. The ground was littered with fallen nuts, and from a distance several large birds could be seen foraging upon the earth. Yet throughout the journey he merely observed, he did not strike at any creature. As an elite hunter, one must first possess a thorough understanding of the threats and resources within their hunting grounds. Very quickly he uncovered the tracks of wild boars. The chaotic nature of the footprints suggested the presence of an entire herd. However, the depth of the tracks left him feeling a sense of genuine trepidation. It appeared that the beasts weighed at least 500 kilograms each. He proceeded with caution, finally cresting the high ground along the mountainside. His eyes brightened instantly. In the valley below, a sparkling stream flowed, while to the west, massive aloe vera bushes stood tall. Over a dozen wild boars were gathered by the stream, appearing to be an entire sounder. The alpha boar was estimated to weigh at least 750 kilograms. Following him were his mates, the first, second, and third sows, along with more than 10 piglets each the size of a domesticated hog. Charging in for a direct confrontation would be sheer folly. A trap was necessary. He crawled silently backward, hugging the earth as he retreated into the forest. The children were trembling with immense fear. They had never beheld such colossal prey before. Expecting nothing from them, he took the initiative to set the traps alone. Using vine ropes, he fashioned several figure-6 snare loops directly over the boar's tracks. He secured the other ends to large, sturdy trees, knowing that once a boar's foot stepped inside, the loop would cinch tight, gripping ever harder the more the beast struggled. For their safety, he ordered the children to climb the trees. Now he only needed to drive the herd back toward the traps. He silently circled around to the thicket on the far side of the stream, his body smeared with mud, 2 heavy branches gripped in his hands. He suddenly leaped out from behind the brush, shouting at the top of his lungs. The herd, having never encountered such a creature, panicked and stampeded headlong into the forest. He pursued them closely, shouting as he ran to maintain the pressure. Moments later, the shrill, desperate cries of the wild boars echoed from ahead. Reaching the site, he found the alpha boar and one of the adult sows trapped on the ground. This type of vine rope would not hold for long. Clutching his bone spear, he approached with caution, seizing the perfect moment to thrust forcefully into the beast's gaping maw. The sharpened tip pierced through the nape of its neck, and blood erupted like a geyser. After a brief struggle, the 750-kilogram titan collapsed, its massive frame twitching intermittently. Only then did he exhale a long sigh of relief. However, a daunting problem immediately arose. With a carcass of this magnitude, how could he hope to transport it with only 5 children? Glancing at the sow struggling incessantly beside him, his eyes lit up. He first used the vine ropes to secure the sow to a nearby tree, then bound its snout tightly to prevent it from biting or causing harm. He then took 2 more ropes and fastened them, one by one, to the sow's forelegs. Finally, the rope was securely fastened around the pig. Once everything was prepared, I took hold of the rope tied to its snout and led the way. Da Chui and Zi each took one side, guiding the sow by its front legs. Da Mao and Mao followed at the rear, staves in hand, keeping watch. Thus the group journeyed through the dense, sprawling forest. At long last, the tribe's cave came into view in the distance. A young boy clearing brush outside was the first to spot us. He cried out in alarm, alerting the entire tribe. Soon everyone swarmed out like bees from a disturbed hive, though none dared to approach. Having never seen such a massive beast before, I summoned the old cripple. I instructed him to prepare a large vat and a supply of salt. Once he arrived with the vessel, I dug a pit in the earth and placed the vat inside, ensuring only the rim protruded slightly above the ground. I then directed the blood into the vat, not allowing a single drop to go to waste. Before long, it was filled with blood. I added a bowl of brine and stirred it thoroughly. It would soon set into a delicious congealed blood jelly, perfect for the evening soup. The pigskin would be tanned and fashioned into sturdy leather boots or packs. These 2 beasts would surely provide a bounty of resources. Beneath the hide lay a layer of pure white lard nearly 4 fingers thick. Soon it would be rendered over the fire. With the exception of the lungs, which would be used for fishing bait, every part of the carcass was edible. Even the largest bones were clean. They would serve well as material to be honed into weapons or tools. We spent the entire afternoon laboring over these 2 massive 1,000-catty beasts. Though we were exhausted, the harvest was truly cause for celebration. The drying racks were draped with slabs of meat, both large and small. A vat of blood jelly sat prepared, alongside 3 vats of pristine white lard. The children laughed with delight as they snacked on cracklings, and even Shu Bing ate with great satisfaction. Just as the old cripple opened the kiln to retrieve the evening's pottery, the rest of the tribe returned from their long day. The fishing party had returned with hundreds of fish, and the hunting party had fared just as well. They brought back 3 wild fowl, 2 large serpents, over 10 bird eggs, a dozen ground squirrels, and a basket of nuts. More surprisingly, the aunt of Shu Bing had led the foraging party to a new discovery. A variety of peeling away the outer layer revealed a natural amber-colored sap. If gathered in sufficient quantity, it could be refined into white sugar. For this discovery, I specifically commended the young woman. The evening meal was a joyous affair for everyone. Yet the elder's face darkened, holding a whip made of thorned golden chicken vines, as he chased after Kubing, lashing out relentlessly. From the original owner's memories, I knew that cord served as the tribal disciplinary law, used exclusively to punish those who committed grave offenses. Seeing this, I hurriedly stopped the enraged elder, demanding to know the reason for his violence. As it turned out, he claimed that the root was the bait of a demonic tree. Anyone who stole these roots would eventually be devoured by the demon tree itself. Upon hearing this, I immediately ordered everyone to cease consuming these roots. It was not that I truly believed his words, but I feared the possibility that the substance might be toxic or induce an addiction. Because of this, I remained hyper-vigilant throughout the night, carefully monitoring my body for any signs of change. Fortunately, the night passed without incident. By the time the sky grew bright, every member of the tribe had ventured out. I began organizing the tasks for the day. The other duties remained as they usually were. The only difference was that Kubing and his mother had joined the fishing party, while I led 4 subordinates to accompany the foraging team. I had to see for myself what this demon tree the elder spoke of truly was. The tree was located deep within the mountain behind our cave. This mountain lacked towering trees, yet the undergrowth was incredibly dense and filled with various fruit-bearing plants. While trekking, I joyfully discovered the chili peppers I had been longing for day and night. A patch of vibrant red was hidden within the bushes. However, the tribespeople had never eaten them, as their searing heat led them to believe they were inedible. I immediately issued an order to my 4 subordinates. No other work was required today. They were to focus solely on harvesting these peppers. I then continued onward with the foraging team. After crossing a mountain ridge, a bowl-shaped valley opened up before my eyes. Everywhere I looked, the remains of animal skeletons lay scattered, bleached a grayish blue, resembling a graveyard. At the heart of the valley stood a bizarre tree rising approximately 60 meters tall. It towered there in imposing silence. Its roots spanned an area with a radius of 500 meters, with the density of the root network increasing the closer one approached the center. This pattern appeared designed to lure animals toward the main trunk. My intuition warned me that the closer I drew to the trunk, the greater the danger would become, yet I resolved to investigate further. With my current physical prowess, I was confident that I could emerge unscathed. With every step, I used the tip of my spear to probe the ground before me, slowly advancing toward the center. Just as my spearhead breached the area shielded by the canopy, the intuition honed through years as a Special Forces operative warned me that danger was imminent. I hastily withdrew my spear and retreated along the path I had carved. At that very moment, a shrill whistling sound descended from above, and over a dozen sharp thorns, nearly a meter in length, plunged into the earth. They struck precisely at the spot my spearhead had touched moments before. Each of these thorns was nearly a centimeter in diameter, with a white flower the size of a bowl blooming at the base. Could these be nature's own arrows? A surge of immense joy flooded through me. The classic tale of borrowing arrows with straw boats flashed instantly into my mind. I used my wicker basket as a decoy, tied a long rope to it, and cast it beneath the canopy. Whoosh, 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 in the blink of an eye, over a dozen sharp thorns were embedded in it. I repeated this maneuver again and again. In short order, I had secured 2 large bundles of these deadly spikes. Upon leaving the forest, I instructed the women that while the tree roots were edible, they were to harvest them only from the outer perimeter. On the trek back to the tribe, I gathered 100 saplings of the devilstone tree, each roughly 3 centimeters thick. These saplings were remarkably straight, the finest raw material for crafting spears. I summoned the 4 youths who were gathering chili peppers, and together, the 5 of us hauled the timber home. Upon our return to the tribe, the children crowded around to inspect our haul. Yet, in the eyes of the pregnant women, what we had brought back was utterly useless. The peppers were inedible, and the sticks were too thin. They would hardly fell any prey. But their skepticism did nothing to dampen my high spirits. I intended to devote the remaining time to perfecting my equipment. Once stripped of their bark, the thorns were both smooth and incredibly hard, each about the thickness of a cigarette. If fashioned into arrowheads, they would certainly qualify as heavy-duty ammunition. While this would inevitably reduce the effective range, the piercing power would be devastating. As for the 3-centimeter saplings, their wood was exceptionally dense. Once the surfaces were fire-hardened and the tips ground to a point, they would be more than sufficient for the hunt. The task of sharpening these spears was naturally delegated to the 4 youths. Eventually, every member of the tribe would be equipped with this new model of spear. Now all that remained was to craft a bow. Given our current limitations, a longbow was the only viable option. Though cumbersome, its destructive potential was formidable, and to construct such a bow, I required mulberry wood. I recalled seeing such trees in the forest where we hunted the wild boar. I needed only to locate a specimen of the appropriate size. In truth, what occupied my mind most was the aloe vera I had discovered during the boar hunt. Owing to the abundant fibers within its leaves, it was the premier material for crafting rope, and it could even be woven into fabric to mend our clothing. While not as pliable as hemp, it is far superior to animal hide and possesses remarkable durability. More importantly, its sap can be utilized to treat wounds. It serves both as an anti-inflammatory to purge toxins and as a cooling agent to reduce fever. With this in mind, I intend to begin large-scale cultivation of aloe starting next year. By then, the members of our tribe will finally have material for clothing, and we can significantly reduce the risk of death caused by infections sustained during the hunt. The following day, I ventured into the forest to hunt wild boars, and I was fortunate enough to discover 2 branches that had been knocked over by some creature. Having dried naturally in the shade, they were perfect to be crafted into bows. I spent an entire day preparing stone axes and stone knives, then dedicated another full day to carving and shaping the wood. A longbow measuring 1.5 meters finally began to take its intended form. It took another day of careful bending and polishing before it could be considered complete. The bowstring was braided from pineapple fibers, while the arrows were fashioned entirely from existing sharp thorns. For the fletching, I utilized the azure feathers of a peacock. In a single stretch, I crafted over 200 arrows. 2 days later, I gathered every member of the tribe in the open clearing. 30 meters away, I set up a straw target, upon which I hung the ground squirrels we had caught that day. First, I demonstrated the proper technique for throwing a spear to the gathered crowd. From a distance of 30 meters, I pierced the straw target, followed by a demonstration of close-quarters combat with the long spear. The tribesmen watched in exhilaration. Only now did they realize that their leader had spent these past few days forging weapons. Excluding the young children, I distributed 1 spear to every member of the tribe. For those heading out to hunt, I assigned 3 spears each, 2 for throwing and 1 reserved for melee combat. The youths approaching maturity are now required to practice spear throwing daily, in addition to their usual tasks of weeding and play. The new model of long spear is exquisite, and the tribesmen are so enamored with these standardized weapons that they refuse to let them out of their sight. Aside from throwing stones, this is the only weapon capable of striking from a distance. Next, I proceeded to demonstrate the bow and arrow. From a distance of nearly 100 paces, I fired 5 consecutive arrows, all of which struck the ground squirrels true. The entire crowd was stunned, and they surged forward in a flurry of excitement. They clamored to touch the weapon, but I allowed them only to observe. I have no intention of mass-producing them yet. After all, the manufacturing process remains far too laborious. With the successful distribution of the long spears, I began turning my attention to the creation of leather footwear. 2 black wild boar hides after repeated tanning have become exceptionally durable and supple. My goal is to ensure that, aside from my own boots, which are crafted entirely from pig hide, every member of the tribe possesses footwear with soles made from wild boar leather. The uppers, meanwhile, are stitched together from the hides of various smaller creatures. The boots worn by Kubin were fashioned by my own hands. They rise high, reaching all the way to the knees. The interior is lined with soft animal fur, providing immense warmth. Ever since he received his new boots, the boy has spent every day showing them off to everyone. After my tireless efforts, the small supply of animal hides within the tribe has been completely exhausted, and the weather continues to grow colder. The demand for more furs has become urgent. Now that we have sufficient pottery, I have entrusted the old cripple with a new task, brick firing. Once we have a large quantity of bricks, we can construct a larger kiln and even use them to build walls and houses. The task of weeding assigned to the children is also nearing completion. Several dozen acres of land outside the cave have been thoroughly cleared. Whether for building homes or planting crops, the land is now ready. However, as we currently lack suitable seeds, we can only cultivate a small amount of chili peppers. The pineapple fiber plant is a perennial. I intend to plant them on the mountain behind us, where they can be harvested once a year. Having organized these long-term tasks, I prepared to venture further afield to seek out large herbivorous animals and the equipment necessary for such a journey. I have been preparing for a long time. From weapons to food and water, nothing is missing. After instructing the tribesmen, I hoisted my basket onto my back and set out. As for the elder, his face clearly betrayed his anxiety regarding my departure. He has never seen anyone survive a night spent outside the cave and return alive. Herbivorous animals typically dwell upon the grasslands. The first objective now is to find a way out of this endless forest. After traveling all morning, the trees began to grow shorter. This filled me with joy. It was a sign that I was nearing the edge of the dense forest. The morning's trek had left my throat parched. I approached a river, intending to drink, and crouched down to retrieve my pottery bowl to scoop up the water. Suddenly, a gargantuan monster erupted from the calm surface of the river. Its massive blood-red maw, bristling with fangs, snapped toward me. Startled, I scrambled to turn away. The monster's jaws clamped onto my basket, which became wedged firmly within its mouth. It could neither spit it out nor bite through it. He could only shake his head from side to side. He had been dragged into the water. Swaying left and right in a moment of mortal peril, he struggled to draw the dagger concealed in his boot and severed one of the straps. Only then was he able to turn himself around with great difficulty. With one hand, he clung desperately to the remaining strap, while his other hand drove the dagger repeatedly into the aquatic beast's head. The monster thrashed even more violently, lifting him upward, leaping out of the water, and slamming him back down with immense force, before dragging him deep into the murky depths once more. He rolled over, mounted the beast's head, and mercilessly plunged his blade into both of its eyes. Blood mixed with brain matter poured incessantly from the empty sockets, turning the river water into a murky crimson. Gradually, the creature's struggle weakened until it was reduced to nothing more than erratic tremors. Exhausted, he swam to the opposite bank and rested for a while as the beast finally drew its last breath. With its pale belly floating on the surface, his carrying basket remained lodged firmly within the creature's jaws. He was forced to find a sturdy vine, thread it through the beast's eye sockets, and expend every ounce of his remaining strength to drag it ashore. Only then did he have the opportunity to examine the monster closely. It turned out to be nothing more than a fish, though one that spanned nearly 5 meters in length. After resting for a moment, he grabbed a stone axe and began to hammer at the massive fish's jagged teeth. There were over 50 triangular teeth, each the size of a child's hand. Only after breaking them all free could he retrieve his basket to inspect his belongings. Fortunately, the fire starter tube had remained watertight. Though other items had suffered minor damage, they were still functional. However, just as he prepared to ignite a fire to dry his clothes, the sound of footsteps suddenly echoed from the forest. Turning his head, he saw a woman with deathly pale skin leading a young girl, both of whom were staring at him in terror. Suddenly, they let out a shriek and turned to flee in a panic. A round object remained discarded on the ground behind them. He stepped forward to investigate, only to discover it was a wooden bucket fashioned from a hollowed-out log. It seemed the two women had been there to fetch water, only to abandon their bucket in their desperate flight. It was likely they would return with reinforcements soon. Indeed, before long, the woman returned, accompanied by several members of her tribe. They were draped in white animal hide cloaks, their skin as pale as if it had been coated in lime. The group stared intently at the massive fish behind him. Every one of them wore an expression of profound astonishment. A man who appeared to be their leader locked eyes with him and pointed directly at the wooden bucket nearby. Understanding the gesture, he used his spear to lift the wooden chest and handed it to the leader. The leader accepted the chest, muttering something in an incomprehensible tongue before gesturing toward the massive fish behind him. Though he did not understand the words, the pointing was clear enough. He stepped aside to grant them passage. The group surged forward to carve up the fish, some of the women weeping with relief as they worked. The leader smiled, struck his own chest lightly with a fist, and extended it toward him in a gesture of solidarity. He was taken aback, but seeing the man's friendly demeanor, he concluded that there was no hostility intended. He hesitated for a moment before bumping his fist against the man's. The leader laughed heartily, embraced him warmly, and continued to speak in his strange tongue, using animated hand gestures to bridge the gap between them. Though they lacked a common language, expressions and body language proved sufficient to convey their intent. He explained that he had crossed the river and was currently searching for a creature with horns upon its head. The man nodded in understanding and revealed that many members of his tribe had been consumed by this very fish. To show his gratitude for slaying the beast, the leader invited him to be a guest of their tribe. Seeing that twilight was approaching, and realizing their tribes were nearby, he considered the potential for future trade and alliance. With that, he agreed to the invitation. He signaled for them to take the carcass with them, assuring them that the creature was suitable for consumption. The man looked visibly startled. In their experience, they were the ones hunted by the river beasts, never the other way around. Nevertheless, he deferred to his guest's judgment and agreed. As the fish was colossal, it had to be butchered into manageable portions before they could transport it. He was forced to resume his labor. The silver fish skin stretched 4 meters long and 3 meters wide, smooth, elastic, and most importantly, completely waterproof. He made a swift decision and claimed it for his own. The remaining fish meat was cleaned and carved into massive slabs for the villagers to carry. Their tribe resided deep within the forest. After walking for less than 10 minutes, they arrived at a colossal hollow tree offering an interior space of nearly 100 square meters. While not expansive, it was sufficient for their numbers, as the tribe was incredibly small. Including both men and women, there were only 14 adults in total. With the addition of the children, the entire tribe consisted of merely 32 people. He began to refer to those who dwelt within this hollow tree as the tree tribe. Their unnaturally pale complexion was a result of living their entire lives within the shadows of this dark forest. The tribal elder pointed toward the east. He informed him that by traveling in that direction and exiting the black forest, one would reach a mountain that seemed to touch the very clouds. It was on that mountain that the creatures they moved with the swiftness of the wind, leaving no chance for pursuit. Based on the elder's description, he surmised it was likely a creature resembling a large antelope. If one were to chase it directly, they would surely fall behind. However, he realized he could set a trap in advance. He appeared highly confident, yet neither Dashu nor the elder held much hope for his success. Seeing the elder remain silent, Dashu began to introduce the nature of their clothing to him. It was crafted from the hide of a large rabbit, with a body length exceeding half a meter. These rabbits favored the moss and mushrooms found deep within the forest, which were abundant in this dark woodland. His eyes immediately lit up. Rabbits were a valuable resource indeed. One must understand that this species breeds with a frequency of mice. A litter of 5 or more is common. Once these rabbits reach 4 months of age, they are capable of reproduction, typically producing a new litter every 2 months. If they could capture 2 pairs of mature rabbits to domesticate, the population would grow to several hundred within a year. By then, the entire tribe would no longer lack clothing, and rabbit meat would become a vital source of sustenance. That evening after their meal, Dashu led a group to lie in wait nearby. Before long, a plump rabbit hopped into view. It scanned its surroundings with caution and, sensing no movement, slowly approached the patch of mushrooms. At that exact moment, Dashu and his men surged forward. Using thick, branched tree limbs, they quickly surrounded the rabbit, rendering it unable to flee. They then used sharpened wooden tongs to secure and capture it alive. An idea immediately took root in his mind regarding a potential arrangement with them. If he could convince them to assist him in hunting these rabbits, it would be most advantageous. Afterward, they moved to a different location and laid out the mushrooms as bait. This time he decided to demonstrate his own prowess. He drew his longbow and pulled an arrow from his quiver. Dashu stared in bewilderment, having no idea what the strange object was. Just then, another rabbit cautiously approached, stopping over a dozen meters from the mushrooms. Dashu hurried to tug on his arm, signaling for him to prepare to rush the prey. Ignoring him, he leveled the bow and nocked the arrow. With a sharp whistle, the projectile pierced the rabbit's throat. Dashu stood stunned, staring at the bow in his hands. He smiled and handed the bow over to him. He then provided another arrow and, taking his hand, guided him on how to draw the string. He instructed him to fire another shot at the rabbit lying on the ground. With a piercing whistle, the arrow flew true, burying itself more than halfway into its target. The members of the tree tribe cried out in immediate astonishment. They were filled with intense curiosity regarding this miraculous weapon. Seeing that the elder was unwilling to part with the bow, he gifted him a dragon feather arrow as a symbol of the friendship between them. The subsequent hunt transformed into a solo exhibition of his prowess. In less than half an evening, he had brought down over a dozen rabbits. Such a tally was beyond their wildest imagination, for on an average day, capturing 3 or 4 would be considered a great success. This feat caused the members of the tree tribe to quietly speculate about the true strength of his tribe. Upon their return, per his request, the rabbit pelts from this hunt belonged to him, while the meat went to the tree tribe. They naturally raised no objections. If they remained here for a while longer, they would certainly be able to stockpile enough prey for their tribe. His objective for this journey had effectively been met, yet he harbored a desire to venture further and explore this world. Moreover, he was deeply intrigued by the beasts the elder had mentioned. Perhaps capturing a few alive to pull carts would not be a bad idea. The next morning, he replenished his food and fire starter before bidding farewell to the elder. He took the opportunity to ask him to capture some live rabbits, which only required grass and mushrooms for sustenance each day. He promised to exchange other prey for them upon his return. The elder was reluctant to see him leave, as the presence of such an expert would have ensured their tribe a far more prosperous winter. Yet he understood that the young man had more important matters to attend to. After departing from the tree tribe, he trekked forward, marking his path by snapping branches and planting them in the earth. After 2 days of arduous travel, he finally emerged from the dense, dark forest. Before him, the landscape suddenly opened up into a vast, sprawling grassland. Only a few scattered trees dotted the horizon. Tracks belonging to various herbivores began to appear upon the ground. He drew his bow, proceeding forward with cautious vigilance. Before long, a sight met his eyes that brought a smile to his face. A herd. Blue-cheeked antelopes, each the size of a domesticated donkey, were grazing leisurely. If he could capture them to replace beasts of burden, it would be ideal. He immediately conceived a plan to capture them alive. However, one glance at these blue-cheeked antelopes, specifically the sharp, dangerous horns atop their heads, revealed they were not to be trifled with. Were he to charge blindly, a stampede of these 10-plus creatures would be enough to send his entire tribe to their graves. Observing them closely, he discovered that it was currently the mating season. Within this herd, there was only one mature male. The rest consisted of 8 females and 8 young. Realizing this, a scheme immediately formed in his mind. He could use the same tactics he once employed against the peacocks. By first neutralizing the alpha male, the rest would surely follow in his wake. He carefully retreated to a safe distance and began to craft a bola. Not long after, he returned, carrying his bola. He concealed himself silently behind a thicket, waiting for the opportune moment. Soon enough, a favorable opening presented itself. He observed the male blue horse antelope mounting the female, caught in the midst of their mating ritual. He swung the bola with precision. The cord spun like a whirlwind, flying toward the pair and instantly binding their hind legs together. Both the male and the female shuddered violently before crashing to the ground, crying out in distress. Without hesitation, he cast another loop of rope with the skill of a seasoned frontiersman, securing it firmly around the legs of 2 other female antelopes standing nearby. The 7 blue horse antelopes fell into immediate chaos, scattering and colliding with one another. Before long, several were hopelessly tangled together, struggling and wailing in their entrapment. The 2 remaining females, sensing the dire situation, led the 8 young fawns in a frantic dash for safety. He watched with silent frustration as the 10 antelopes escaped beyond his reach, forced to content himself with binding the legs of those he had already captured. To truly tame wild beasts is a formidable task. For a creature as aggressive as the blue horse antelope, one must first dismantle its pride. Thus he utilized a stone mallet to shatter the horns they held in such high regard, then seared the severed stumps with glowing embers to ensure they would never grow back. The 7 antelopes previously thrashing with fierce resistance were instantly reduced to submissive, spiritless creatures. Finally, he retrieved his ropes. He tethered the male antelope at the lead, with the rest following in a single file. By the time he completed these tasks, dusk had begun to settle. He led them to a small stream and stewed a pot of dried rabbit meat to satisfy his hunger. To the northeast of the stream stood a mountain of 5-colored rock, reflecting brilliant hues in the light of the setting sun. Judging by the coloration, he surmised that it was a mineral vein containing a diverse array of ores. This discovery filled him with immense joy. He longed to investigate the site immediately, but as night had fully descended, he was forced to suppress his excitement for the time being. The following morning, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, you were awakened by a rhythmic sound. The scene before your eyes was so startling that you nearly leapt to your feet. Within the small clearing where you had tethered the blue horse antelopes, the 2 females that had escaped the previous day had returned, leading their 8 young back to the fold. Furthermore, they had seemingly enticed a mature male blue horse antelope to accompany them. You hid silently behind the brush, preparing to employ your previous tactics once more. After a swift display of skill, your herd of blue horse antelopes grew from the initial 7 to a total of 18. By now the sun had fully risen, and you set out toward the 8. This place is truly teeming with precious treasures in every corner. After a careful observation, you realize that this is, in fact, a rich copper mine. The varying colors are the mineral deposits naturally accompanying the copper ore. With these ores at your disposal, the forging of bronze tools is no longer a distant dream. Furthermore, those accompanying minerals possess their own unique utility. The orange hue indicates realgar, that is, orpiment, which can be used as a medicinal ointment to treat snake and insect bites, or ingested to purge parasites from within the body. The white substance is guanyin clay, an ideal material for crafting iron smelting furnaces. The large red mounds are merely termite nests, but the weathered soil within is an excellent material for kiln-firing ceramics. Fortunately, the journey from Babao Mountain back to your tribe is only a 3-day walk. If you were to use the Lan Maling beasts to pull a cart, it would be even swifter. You would only need to construct a bridge to the north. Having laid out plans for the future, you finally have a moment to admire the surrounding scenery. East of Babao Mountain lies an intricate network of rivers, forming an endless expanse of wetlands. At the foot of the mountain, the lush vegetation serves as a paradise for both flora and fauna. The ryegrass reaches your knees, the alfalfa rises to your waist, and the sweet elephant grass grows as tall as trees. These are all favorite delicacies for herbivores, and the cleared land in front of your tribe's cave is perfectly suited for cultivating these types of fodder crops. Your grand ambition of raising rabbits, along with the flock of Lan Maling about to be domesticated, relies entirely on these grasses to survive. There is also broadleaf water celery. Gathering some will provide a necessary supplement of vitamins. In the span of a single afternoon, you collect a pouch of grass seeds, tie it to the back of a female Lan Maling, and set out to forage for your evening meal. Before long, a plump giant goose with a wingspan of 5 meters is brought down from the sky by 2 swift whistling arrows. You pluck clean every flight feather that could possibly be fashioned into fletching for your arrows. You intend to roast the entire bird to replenish the supply of dried rabbit meat that is nearly exhausted in your pack. Just as you are crouching by the water's edge to dress the goose, a chance discovery moves you almost to tears. You find within its stomach grains of rice that had not yet been digested. Furthermore, this variety of rice is unlike any you have ever seen before. Each grain is slightly larger than a mung bean. This is the first grain crop you have discovered in this world. Your immediate resolution is to locate its origin at all costs. That night, you do not rest. Gathering a few branches, you begin to hurriedly craft gear to venture deep into the marshlands. You must harvest those rice plants before the beasts devour them. Early the next morning, Ban rowed a simple dugout canoe, seeking out the deepest waters before venturing deep into the waterlogged marshlands. At the same time, within the dark forest, Dathu was leading his tribesmen to hunt snow rabbits to meet the demands of Ban and his own tribe. Nearly the entire tribe had been mobilized, working day and night, leaving only the elders and children under 6 years of age back at their dwellings. To increase their yield, he even resorted to brutal tactics. Whenever a rabbit burrow was discovered, they would dig it up directly, or if that failed, they would use fire and smoke to drive the prey out. This method was indeed effective, allowing them to capture quite a few, including several litters of newly born rabbits. Yet this style of hunting would bring catastrophe upon his tribe. During this season, every tribe must stockpile food for survival. The man-eating tribe was no exception, and their source of sustenance was none other than living people. Anyone who falls into their grasp meets a grim fate. The men are used to fill their bellies, while the women are kept for reproduction or forced labor. On the very day Ban ventured deep into the marsh, a hunting party from the man-eating tribe was lured by the glow of the fires Dathu's group used to hunt the rabbits. This war party consisted entirely of adult males, numbering up to 40 in total. Their weapons were crude stone axes and wooden spears. Their combat strength was formidable. Most notably, their 2 leaders were mounted upon 2 adolescent bears. Compared to them, the Thu tribe, even with every man, woman, and child accounted for, was not as numerous. Faced with such a powerful enemy, Dathu immediately led his tribesmen in a retreat. The man-eating tribe gave chase with bloodthirsty intent. Fortunately, he was intimately familiar with the terrain and intentionally chose treacherous paths to escape. The enemy could not immediately overtake them. However, there were still those who fell behind. A young girl who had been gathering mushrooms was overcome by terror. While fleeing, she tripped over a tree root. No sooner had she stood up than a flying axe struck her back. Immediately afterward, the pursuing enemies caught up and pierced her through with a spear, killing her instantly. The band of savage cannibals laughed raucously as they swarmed around, beginning their vile display. Dathu gritted his teeth in fury, but he did not stop. He knew that even if the entire tribe charged in to help, they would only be slaughtered and devoured. Because of the fallen girl, the enemy's pursuit was delayed for a brief moment. Dathu hurried back to the tribe to inform the elder of what had transpired. The enemy was far too powerful to resist. There was only one path forward: relocation. The Thu elder ultimately decided that Dathu should lead the tribesmen toward the east of the dark forest to find Ban. After all, judging by the quality of Ban's weapons, it was clear his tribe must be exceptionally powerful. As for the elder, he remained behind to hold back the enemy, knowing full well that he could no longer continue the journey. Daishu suppressed his sorrow, gave a firm nod, and hurriedly ordered everyone to pack their belongings before setting off toward the east. In truth, he felt no certainty in his heart whatsoever. You have been gone for several days now. Where are you at this moment? Whether you are still alive or not, he has no way of knowing, but to remain here would be to await death. He had no other choice. Before long, the pursuing enemy discovered their tribe. The hollow tree where they had lived for generations was now transformed into a sea of flames. The fire had been ignited by the elder, who hoped to incinerate a few of the encroaching enemies and buy time for his people. Following this tragedy, the tree tribe, which had originally numbered 32, was now reduced to only 30. The group trudged forward, weary and dejected, heading toward the east of the dark forest. Initially, Daishu held little hope of finding you, but when he caught sight of the fresh tree branches stuck into the ground along the path, his faith was immediately restored. It took only a day and a half to reach the fringes of the dark forest. By the time they emerged from the woods, it was dusk. The sky had bled into a deep crimson hue under the setting sun. The members of the tree tribe were instantly captivated by the sight before them. This was the first time they had ever laid eyes upon the outside world. However, Daishu furrowed his brows. The markers you had left behind ended here, and he did not know where else to search. Just as he was overcome with uncertainty, he suddenly noticed signs of a campfire by the stream. Approaching to investigate, he saw numerous animal tracks embedded in the muddy bank, among which were the distinct impressions of your strange boots. Daishu let out a sigh of relief, knowing you must be nearby. He instructed everyone to make camp and stay the night. And just as Daishu led his tribesmen in their flight, you were deep within the marshes, carefully searching everywhere. Finding wild rice amidst the dense thickets of reeds was no simple task. Suddenly your eyes lit up as a realization struck you. Waterfowl enjoy feeding on this type of grain, therefore you only needed to search where the birds gathered. With this thought, you took immediate action, steering the dugout canoe while striking the surface of the water with a wooden pole. Suddenly, a flock of waterfowl burst into flight from the reeds not far away. You quickly paddled the canoe in the direction the birds had ascended. As you drew closer, a patch of grain, heavy with ears of rice, your eyes suddenly ignited with intensity, and your heart brimmed with excitement. This was the wild rice you had been searching for. Without delay, you paddled even harder toward the shallow waters. But just as your boat was nearing the destination, a human cry suddenly rang out from behind. Looking back toward the source of the sound, you saw several primitive individuals, bare-chested, clinging to floating logs, waving their hands at you and shouting incessantly, their expressions filled with deep anxiety. These people belonged to the Ling tribe who inhabited this marshland. The tribe consisted of only 50 members, and they were currently gathering food supplies for the coming winter. Ling Sao caught sight of a fellow human sitting upon a wondrous object drifting across the water, slowly floating toward the death-forbidden zone mentioned in the elders' legends. Driven by kindness, you, Ling Sao, the leader of the tribe's foraging party, hurriedly shouted towards you, hoping you would not continue any further. Regrettably, you did not understand their language and merely stared at them in confusion. Seeing your lack of reaction, Ling Sao anxiously swam toward your vessel. Just as you remained dazed, Ling Sao reached the side of your boat. She pointed frantically at the reeds thick with wild rice, shouting continuously, her face a mixture of worry and terror. Realizing she harbored no ill intent, you felt a sense of relief. However, judging by the woman's expression, she was clearly attempting to warn you of a hidden danger. It was not a path to be taken. You used gestures to mime the shape of a ferocious beast, imitated its roar, and then pointed back at the reed patch. Ling Sao shook her head, pointed at you, then at the forbidden land, and placed her hand on the water surface, mimicking a sinking motion, signaling that going there would result in being swallowed by the swamp. Having grasped Ling Sao's meaning, you immediately let out a sigh of relief. You were deeply appreciative of her well-intentioned warning, but you were well prepared. There was no reason to turn back now. With that, you gripped your oar and paddled toward the reeds without a hint of hesitation. Ling Sao shrieked in panic once more, yet she dared not follow any further. But in the next second, she was struck dumb with astonishment. She witnessed you strapping two plank-like objects to the soles of your feet, and clutching a square bronze shield as large as your own body, you strolled calmly onto the death-forbidden zone without sinking into the depths. Every person who witnessed this scene gasped in unison. They had never seen anyone walk upon the death-forbidden zone without being consumed by the marsh. Yet, despite appearing composed, your journey was far more arduous than they could have imagined. Beneath the dense reeds lay nothing but thick, treacherous mud. With each step, your feet sank deep, requiring immense exertion to pull them free from the mire. Exhausting every ounce of your strength, you finally reached the small patch of golden rice. Each stalk towered at nearly 2 meters, heavy with plump, radiant grains of rice. You produced the prepared snakeskin bags. You harvested with a frantic intensity, not resting until every last grain had been gathered. Only then, with 2 brimming bags in hand, did you return to your vessel, eager to head home and usher in an era of agriculture. Yet before you had traveled far, you were intercepted by the tribesmen of the Ling tribe. Their eyes lit up with greed as they observed your vessel, marveling at how it remained buoyant despite the heavy load. It became clear to them that this craft could carry not only people but also heavy cargo. The cleverer ones among them immediately envisioned themselves navigating these small boats to gather water caltrops. Facing them, you felt a surge of irritation, yet seeing no clear malice in their intentions, you kept your temper in check. Ling Thao sensed your growing frustration and quickly gestured, asking if you would teach them how to construct such a craft. You surveyed the group of people waiting in the water. Their skin appeared slightly swollen and waterlogged, and remembering that they had kindly warned you earlier, you readily agreed to their request. You lashed the buoyant logs together and instructed Ling Thao to climb aboard. As expected, even with Ling Thao's weight, the wooden raft remained steady upon the water. Ling Thao was instantly overcome with excitement and beckoned his tribesmen to join him. Unfortunately, the raft could only support two. Any additional weight threatened to capsize it. Those left behind watched Ling Thao with visible envy, while Ling Thao himself was jubilant, for he realized that such rafts were simple to assemble, and the necessary materials were abundant within their tribal territory. With this thought, Ling Thao looked at you with profound gratitude and warmly invited you to visit the Ling tribe as an honored guest. However, you declined, mindful that a herd of landmaw lambs still awaited you beyond the swamp. Ling Thao did not press the matter, instead offering you a water caltrop as large as a chicken egg, intending it as a token of goodwill, promising that should you face any hardship, you could present this token to the Ling tribe for aid. You accepted the caltrop with a smile and, without delay, carried your 2 bags of grain back toward the grasslands at the foot of Babao Mountain. After an entire day of urgent labor, you had secured a total of roughly 60 caddies of grain, yet you could not bring yourself to consume a single kernel. He only wished to transport these treasures home as quickly as possible to sow them for the coming spring harvest. However, one cannot engage in agriculture without proper tools. Thus, he needed to acquire copper and tin ore to forge the necessary farming implements. On the evening that Dathu departed from the Black Forest, our protagonist was situated on a small prairie on the far side of Babao Mountain. He had just finished eating succulent grilled riverfish and was weaving large baskets in preparation for the next day's mining work. But for the tribe at the western foot of Babao Mountain, the situation was dire. When they fled, they had failed to bring any fire starters. For the past 2 days, they had survived solely on meager dried meat. At night, they were cold and famished, forced to huddle together just to stay warm. The next morning, he led the landmaw herd with high spirits, advancing toward the western side of Babao Mountain. Meanwhile, the tribe at the foot of the western mountain was distributing the wild berries they had just gathered among their clansmen. Just then, several members of the tribe excitedly pointed toward Babao Mountain and shouted. From a distance, they saw a youth on the barren rocky slope slowly approaching with a herd of 4-horned beasts. He heard the commotion from below, and looking toward the source of the noise, he spotted the tribe by the stream, wondering briefly why they had arrived here. 10 minutes later, Dathu led a group of people up the mountainside. Seeing their miserable state, he could not help but frown. Why had they brought the children along, and why did everyone look so wretched and filthy? Upon seeing him again, Dathu was as astonished as if he had encountered a celestial being. He knew the youth had come in search of a specific animal, but he never expected him to succeed, let alone capture them alive. Clearly, their stature could not be compared to the terrifying mounted beasts of that man-eating tribe. At this moment in his heart, the youth was nothing less than a god. Seeing that each of them held only a single wild berry, it was evident they lacked even meat to sustain themselves. He hurriedly brought out his remaining dried meat and grilled riverfish to share with them. Dathu sat hunched by the fire, eating while recounting the trials they had faced over the past few days. The others chimed in as well, using gestures and words to supplement his story. As he grasped the situation, he could not help but draw a cold breath. He had not expected a man-eating tribe to be lurking nearby. Suddenly, a harrowing thought crossed his mind. If a man-eating tribe had already reached this tribe, then how far could they be from his own home? Reflecting on this, he immediately decided to finish excavating the ore today and set out on his return journey tomorrow. Shortly thereafter, he looked toward Dathu and asked what they intended to do next. Hearing this, every member of the tribe, the harsh winter approaches and their tribe has been reduced to ashes by a sudden blaze, leaving them hunted by a cannibalistic clan. They stood lost and directionless with no sanctuary in sight. Observing their plight, our protagonist extended an invitation. Why not join my tribe? We have enough provisions to sustain us all through the coming winter. Upon hearing this, Dashu's eyes ignited with hope. He believed the boy's words completely. The 4-horned beast-teeth carcass before them alone was enough to feed them for the entire season. The other members of the tribe were equally eager to accept. They had already witnessed the formidable power of the bow and arrow in the boy's hands. With such weapons, they would never lack for game, nor would they have to fear persecution by their enemies. They all turned to Dashu with burning gazes, silently imploring their leader to accept the offer. Dashu was moved, yet as a leader he felt compelled to remain cautious. After a moment of hesitation, he asked, "If you invite us to join your tribe, will your own leader approve?" The boy chuckled in response. "You need not worry about that, for I am the leader." Dashu's expression shifted to one of profound disbelief. That a child like him could be a leader seemed impossible, yet upon reflection the realization dawned on him. He had witnessed the boy's capabilities firsthand, feats that even a grown man might struggle to achieve. With that thought, he cast aside his hesitation. He agreed without further delay, and to completely dispel their anxieties, the boy handed his own spear to Dashu. He gave the stone axe to a man named Mu Yong and the rattan shield, crafted during the harvest, to a tribesman named Shu Tong. He knew that by entrusting them with such weapons, he would prove he had no intentions of harming them. True to his expectation, those who received the weapons wore expressions of relief and gratitude. Dashu then produced the rabbits that the boy had instructed them to capture alive, over 30 of them, both large and small. Seeing this, the boy could not suppress his excitement. He contemplated their rapid breeding cycle, a new litter every 2 months. From this day forth, his tribe would never have to worry about a shortage of livestock. After their morning meal, Dashu assumed they would depart immediately. To his surprise, the boy began excavating stones from the mountainside. "What do you intend to do with these?" Dashu asked. "With these stones I can craft superior weapons. When the time comes, we will hunt enough game that even eating 3 meals a day will not deplete our stores." Dashu was stunned. This was a quality of life they had never dared to imagine, and without needing further instruction, the entire group began to assist with the excavation. With dozens of extra hands toiling, the pace of their work increased tenfold. By noon, all the large baskets were filled to capacity. This haul consisted primarily of copper ore and tin ore alongside a significant quantity of red termite mound soil and kaolin clay. These were the essential materials required for crafting crucibles and casting molds. Having swiftly finalized the collection, he led his team of several dozen men back onto the path. Each Blue Forest horse carried 2 large woven baskets laden with ore, dried grass, rabbits, and seeds. Along the journey, their pace remained measured and steady. As they traveled, he instructed Dashu and the others on how to wield the weapons he had provided them. They marched until nightfall, eventually finding a spacious clearing to settle for dinner and rest. The first half of the night was tranquil, marked only by the gentle crackling of the campfire. But during the second half of the night, as he lay upon the ground, he suddenly sensed the earth begin to tremor, as if a gargantuan beast were approaching. He immediately recalled the long-nosed monster Dashu had described, and hastily roused the group, ordering them to extinguish all fires. Accompanied by 2 shrill, somewhat immature elephant trumpets, 2 massive silhouettes suddenly materialized in the distance. Moments later, they saw dozens of men wielding torches and weapons, their necks adorned with primitive jewelry crafted from human bone. The man leading the charge atop an elephant raised his hand, and the entire party charged aggressively toward their position. The wealth of combat experience from his previous life kept him unnaturally calm in this moment. He immediately commanded a tribesman named Najuan to lead the group in a retreat toward the north. Meanwhile, Dashu, Muyong, and Shutong remained behind to assist him in holding the line. Though only 4 of them stood their ground, he quickly devised a tactical plan based on the disparity in their equipment. The enemy was led by 2 men mounted on great beasts, yet their speed was vastly inferior to his own party, nor did they possess much agility. Their armaments were primarily throwing weapons such as stone axes and bone spears. An ordinary man could at best throw such a weapon 50 or 60 meters, yet the bow in his hand could strike an undefended target from a distance of 100 meters. Thus, by maintaining distance, he was confident he could eliminate the entire force from beyond their effective range. Dashu watched the elephant-mounted enemies charging forward, his grip on his spear trembling with palpable tension, yet seeing his leader's unnatural composure, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to remain steady. He silently calculated the distance of the approaching enemy in his mind. 200 meters, 150 meters, 100 meters. Instantly, Yonggong drew his bow. With a sharp whistle, the enemy who had charged ahead first collapsed to the ground. The arrow had pierced straight through his chest, the jagged wooden tip protruding from the man's back. The surrounding enemies were frozen in shock, but in that brief moment of hesitation, 2 more arrows whistled through the air and 2 more men fell. At this moment, the captain riding the elephant spotted him in the distance. He let out a roar, signaling his tribesmen to charge while launching a volley of stone axes. Seeing this, he immediately pulled Dashu behind a tree for cover. Muyong followed suit, while Shutong braced his feet, using his rattan shield to block their rear. A series of dull thuds echoed out as several stone axes and a bone spear slammed into the shield. Fortunately, the shield was woven from thick rattan, and Shutong remained unharmed, though it was clear it would not hold against many more such impacts. Seeing the stone axes littered across the ground, Muyong picked up 2 and hurled them back. Within the dense charging formation, 2 more enemies were struck and fell. Dashu, as the former leader of the Shu tribe, naturally refused to be outdone. He retrieved a bone spear and threw it in retaliation. One enemy was instantly pinned firmly to the ground. He was dead beyond any doubt. He immediately commanded his men to retreat and maintain distance to harass the enemy. They repeated this tactic time and again. Of the enemy's original 40-man troop, only 7 now remained. The others were either dead or incapacitated by their wounds. At this juncture, he suddenly signaled the sprinting group to stop, facing their enemies from a distance of 80 meters. The captain riding the elephant was taken aback by their sudden halt, and noting that only a few men remained on his side, all of whom were utterly exhausted, he was driven into a furious rage and charged forward immediately. He regulated his breathing and braced his bow in preparation. When the enemy was within 70 meters, an arrow shot true, piercing the captain's right eye. The leader cried out and tumbled from the elephant's back, only to be crushed by a trailing foot of the advancing elephant, dead beyond any chance of survival. The elephant suddenly, as it turned its head to look, the massive elephant froze, standing completely motionless in its tracks. The underlings nearby were bewildered. How could their leader have perished so suddenly? Yet their momentum did not falter. She immediately ordered a counterattack, and 3 spears along with an arrow were launched instantly. 3 enemies collapsed immediately, leaving only 3 survivors who, gripped by fear, turned and fled in haste. The man riding the elephant struggled to urge the beast to turn around, but finding the movement too slow, he leaped directly from the elephant's back. She immediately let fly another arrow. Before he could even touch the ground, the arrow pierced his chest. He stumbled back a few steps before collapsing into the earth. The three men from Dathu's group surged forward from behind, their stone axes tearing through the air to finish off the final two enemies. With this, the guerrilla skirmish within the dense forest finally drew to a close. The three men could hardly believe that their party of 4 had decimated an army of 40. Meanwhile, the two elephant calves, left without their handlers, stood in the clearing, confused and still. You immediately issued new orders. Thutrang was to remain and keep watch, Mok Dung was to retrieve the clansmen, and Dathu was to accompany you to dispose of any remaining survivors. The three men of Dongthon acknowledged the command and moved out immediately. The feathered arrows were recovered, and the bone spears and stone axes, still intact, were gathered up. Unexpectedly, the two masterless elephants began to follow you, occasionally nudging your back gently with their trunks, seemingly determined to stay by your side. You quickly brushed their trunks away. Why do you follow me? I cannot afford to provide for you. After all, these are genuine giant elephants. Once fully grown, they are colossal beasts that can weigh up to 15 tons. A creature of such magnitude, how much would it consume in a single day? Just then, Dathu frowned and noted that there were only 36 corpses on the path, meaning 4 were still unaccounted for from the original 40. A sense of unease washed over you, but the black forest was vast, and with no way to track them now, you were forced to abandon the search. At daybreak, Thutrang and Mok Dung returned with the main group. As everyone sat down to eat, you instructed Dathu to distribute the recovered stone spears and axes to the tribe. Now, with the exception of the children, everyone possessed a weapon for self-defense. The striped antelopes and the rabbits continued to feed on the stored dried grass, but now 2 massive uninvited guests had arrived to feast for free. Watching the pile of dried grass, which was supposed to last for 2 more meals, disappear in an instant, you felt a sudden sharp headache. You raised your fist, intending to drive the 2 creatures away. To your surprise, as soon as you raised your hand, one of the giant elephants looked at you with an aggrieved and pitiful expression, appearing as if it were on the verge of tears, while the other elephant used its trunk to coil up a bundle of grass and hold it directly in front of you, as if to say, I am sharing this delicacy with you. Please do not send us away. Seeing this, you wore a smile that looked worse than a grimace, helplessly accepting the bundle of grass before shoving it back into its mouth. Afterwards, you left 2 more bundles of grass for them to graze on slowly, then signaled for your people to pack up quickly and set off. After traveling a considerable distance, you noticed the 2 elephants were still busy eating. You couldn't help but exhale in relief. Finally, you had managed to shake them off. Because the people of the tribe had always lived in the Black Forest, they were unaware that the scenery under the sunlight in the outside world could be so beautiful. Along the way, the tribesmen were all filled with excitement. Their incessant shouting startled several pheasants that were foraging on the ground. You raised your hand and fired an arrow. By the time dusk approached, you had gathered quite a significant haul. At that same moment, Xiao Shu was helping his mother pack their belongings by the riverbank. The boy looked toward the north from time to time. His mother had said the chieftain had departed in that direction. Ever since you left, he had been coming to the river with his mother to catch fish every single day, specifically to wait for your return. Suddenly, he spotted several figures in the distant forest. Xiao Shu immediately recognized that the person leading the group was the chieftain of their tribe. The boy jumped for joy and shouted loudly, "Mother, the chieftain has returned." Upon hearing the commotion from afar, she happily waved her hand and let out a joyful shout as well. At that very moment, 2 thunderous elephant trumpets echoed from across the river, drawing everyone's gaze. Hearing this sound, your heart sank as if 10,000 wild beasts were trampling over it. You never imagined that even after traveling so far, you still couldn't shake off those 2 giant elephants. You prayed silently, "Don't come over here, don't come over here." But the more you feared something, the more inevitable it became. With 2 heavy splashes, the 2 elephants leaped into the river. Less than half a minute later, they stood dripping wet before you. Little did you expect that these 2 would play such a dirty trick. As soon as they reached your side, they used the water stored in their trunks to spray you, soaking you to the bone. The message was clear without a single word. Who told you to abandon us? You helplessly wiped the water from your face. If you want to eat at my table, you must work for me from now on. I, your master, will not raise you for nothing. Hearing this, the 2 elephants patted your head with their trunks, though it was unclear what they intended by it. The women of the fishing party recoiled in terror at the sight of the 2 colossal beasts, but upon seeing the creature's submissive behavior toward you, their fear immediately transformed into profound admiration. The leader is truly formidable, they whispered, to be able to subdue such magnificent monsters. Xiao Shu was the first to rush forward, affectionately embracing your leg, showing no fear of the giant beasts standing nearby. You informed them that the newcomers were now members of the tribe. You then led the group back toward the cavern. Xiao Shu rode upon the back of the great elephant, looking remarkably majestic throughout the journey. Along the way, the members of the tree tribe and the fishing party observed one another with great interest. The fishing party's gaze remained fixed primarily on the 18 blue antelopes. Meanwhile, Dashu and his men scrutinized the women of your tribe. They took note of their hairstyles, leather garments, the fish in their baskets, and the white shafted spears each woman carried. These white-shafted spears were Da Shu's most prized possession. To see that everyone possessed one filled him with unadulterated envy. The realization that he had now joined your tribe ignited a sense of genuine excitement within him. Upon arriving back at the settlement, you led the people of the tree tribe into your camp. Seeing your return, the members of your tribe immediately cried out in unison, "Leader!" The members of the tree tribe were instantly captivated by the sheer volume and discipline of the greeting. As they surveyed the scene before them, they were struck speechless. Everywhere they looked, exquisite pottery and jars were displayed. The entrance to the cave was littered with fish, alongside a massive boar pierced by over a dozen wounds, weighing at least 1,000 caddies. You watched with satisfaction, noting that the hunting party had clearly mastered the use of the spears. Having witnessed the true extent of your tribe's strength, Da Shu was finally convinced that he would no longer need to fear starvation. A group of children stood upon a nearby grassy hill, keeping watch over the newly arrived four-horned beasts. The hill was covered in fodder they had harvested over the past several days. Looking at the size of the pile, there was likely enough to sustain the blue antelopes and the two great elephants through the coming winter. You promptly explained to everyone that these four-horned beasts had been tamed by your hand and would henceforth assist in their labor. In a nearby clearing, a substantial mound of fired red bricks had been neatly stacked. The layman reported to you that he was capable of firing 4 kilns daily, and furthermore he had crafted a new tool for the children. With a proud flourish, he revealed his creation. Upon seeing the implement the lame man produced, you were left utterly stunned. It was a simple wooden rake. To think that this man possessed the hidden talent of an inventor. You offered the lame man a few words of praise, then instructed him that he need not fire more bricks tomorrow. Instead, he was to produce a fresh. Speaking of pottery, the elder beside him also had something to add. A few days ago, the Ding tribe from the west came once again to trade for pottery. This time, they offered a bountiful supply of cured meats, enough to sustain the tribe for a considerable period. Once the inspections were complete, you proceeded to settle the newly acquired animals. The rabbits were placed in a corner of the cave, where you constructed a pen using stones and clay to shelter them through the coming winter. Among the 30-plus rabbits, 3 were already pregnant. They had barely been released into the pen before they began plucking their own fur to build nests. Though the other rabbits were only 1 or 2 months old, they had already grown to the size of cantaloupes. By next spring, they would become prolific breeding machines. As for the young giant elephants, they required no supervision. They lingered near the haystacks, refusing to budge no matter how they were shooed away. The blue antelopes were tethered to a tree not far from the cave entrance. You would arrange for men to construct a thatched shed for them tomorrow. With that, the tasks were finished. By the time these chores were completed, dinner was already nearing preparation. Before the meal, you held a special ceremony to welcome the newcomers. The members of the tribe expressed no opposition to the practice of tying up their hair. On the contrary, they felt that having their hair tied back made them look more spirited and far more refined than wandering about with disheveled, unkempt locks. Having hunted a giant boar today, the evening feast could not be without blood pudding, and with wild vegetables added, there was enough to simmer several large pots. There were also the pheasants you had brought down today, prepared into a hearty pot of chicken stew with chestnuts, accompanied by over a dozen fresh grilled fish. Each person was also allotted a piece of sweet and sour fruit. The lavish dinner instantly bridged the distance between the old tribe members and the new. Everyone ate, laughed, and chatted in high spirits. After the meal, you tasked the elders of the tribe to assist the newcomers in sewing skirts so that the new members could learn the craft. Meanwhile, you picked up a piece of charred charcoal, contemplating as you sketched upon the cave walls. On the wall was a rough topographical map of the area outside the cave. It depicted the cave, the nearby stream, the dense forest, and several features that did not yet exist. You were currently deliberating how to best cultivate the vast expanse of vacant land before the cave entrance. This plot spanned nearly 3,600 mu. If it were all converted into paddy fields, the tribe could never finish consuming the harvest even if they ate until they perished. Naturally, planting only rice was out of the question. One must realize that this region was entirely arid, whereas rice requires flooded paddies to thrive. The sheer labor required to transform this dry earth into irrigated fields would be a monumental undertaking. Next came the pressing issue of housing. With the new arrivals and the infants born during this period, the population of the Han tribe had reached 97 souls. The current cave is no longer capable of meeting the basic requirements for daily life. Therefore, the future demands the construction of a settlement upon this land. Residential zones, paddy fields, vegetable gardens, livestock enclosures, warehouses, pastures, metalworking areas, and timber mills. With so many facilities to be established on this plot, a meticulous development plan is essential. The primary challenge to address is the reclamation of the paddy fields. The initial strategy involves constructing a small, square fortified city in the center of the clearing, housing the residential quarters, livestock pens, and storage warehouses within its walls. The metalworking areas and timber mills will also be situated within this stronghold. The entire fortification is designed to provide living conditions for at least 5,000 people. This project can be completed in phases over the course of several years. Subsequently, a moat will be excavated to surround the city. The earth excavated can be combined with sun-dried bricks to construct the ramparts, providing defense against attacks from massive beasts and hostile tribes. Using the moat as a central hub, I intend to engineer an artificial river system. By diverting water from the 89-meter-wide river to the east, I will carve secondary channels so that the water flows from the moat back into the river. Through this method, a vast network of waterways will be established. Following this network, secondary irrigation canals will be dug to provide water for the entire expanse of land. The intended width for both the moat and the artificial river is 4 meters. The river to the east spans 89 meters in width. Since the volume of water remains constant while the riverbed is narrowed by half, the flow velocity of the artificial river will more than double. This increase will be highly advantageous for the installation of hydraulic infrastructure, such as water wheels. The concrete plan is to utilize the cave as the central axis, measuring 200 meters on each side to site the small city, ensuring no delays to the upcoming spring planting season. The first phase of construction involves excavating a water channel connecting the eastern river to the city moat. Careful calculations indicate a length of approximately 700 meters. The excavated soil will be fired into bricks in preparation for the subsequent construction of the city walls. The second phase involves the excavation of the moat. However, there is no immediate urgency for this, as the cave remains habitable for the time being. The third phase focuses on the construction of the defensive walls. The walls are designed with a trapezoidal profile, 4 meters wide at the base, 2 meters at the crest, and standing 5 meters tall. Each of the 4 sides will feature a gate with a 4-meter-wide moat encircling the exterior. With this scale, in this era, no force will be able to breach these defenses. The fourth phase of the project involves the construction of the 700-meter-long return flow river. The excavated soil can be fired into small bricks, essential for constructing houses and other structures within the city. The entire project is estimated to be completed within 3 years at the latest. Otherwise, I fear that by then, there will no longer be enough space for everyone to dwell within the cave. The following morning, once all the tribesmen had departed, I began to delegate the tasks. There was much to be done today, so all food-gathering activities were suspended entirely. The newcomers had yet to finish firing the pottery, so I instructed the lame one to continue with that task. As for the mischievous children, they were assigned to continue gathering grass, strictly following the specific methods I had demonstrated. The grass was to be bundled tightly, ensuring ease of storage and transport. Da Zui, Hozi, Da Mao, and Irma were sent behind the mountain to fell saplings of the 10-person tree, which would be fashioned into spear shafts. The women were divided into 2 groups. The larger team was sent to the valley I had scouted previously to harvest hemp and bitter vine. I provided them with 6 blue spirit horses pulling large baskets for transport. The smaller team was tasked with venturing into the forest to scrape the bark of the bai luo trees, which are coated in wax insect secretions, an excellent raw material for producing wax, which I intend to use for bronze cutting molds. All remaining men were assigned to fell timber. I instructed them to first set aside trunks as thick as a calf's thigh for house construction, while the branches were to be used as firewood. I intend to convert them into charcoal. For the purpose of smelting bronze, the more of this fuel we possess, the better. The burden of transport remains with the blue spirit horses. Should they find the load too heavy, they are to seek assistance from the young giant elephants. The tribesmen did not fully grasp the reasoning behind these arrangements. They believed that autumn should be dedicated solely to the hoarding of food. However, I explained to them that our current reserves of food, especially the fish, would be more than sufficient to last until the following spring. During this season, many of the fish we catch are laden with roe. If we continue to harvest them at this rate, the population of the river will inevitably suffer. Therefore, we must allow the fish time to rest and reproduce. Once the tribesmen had departed for their duties, I began my own work. First, I utilized the available firewood to produce charcoal, then used the kaolin and clay I had gathered to craft several smelting pots and ladles. These were to be used for refining and creating alloys, while the heat-resistant clay mixture served to fashion square molds. This method allows for the casting of copper and tin ingots shaped much like chocolate bars. From there, we can adjust the ratio of copper and tin as needed to forge various tools. Only once the charcoal and the molds were prepared did I begin constructing the smelting furnace. I mixed common clay with shards of broken pottery and chopped grass to create a sturdy mud, constructing a cylindrical furnace with a diameter exceeding 40 centimeters. I built 4 such furnaces in total, allowing for simultaneous firing to save a significant amount of time. Next, I utilized animal hides to construct simple bellows for ventilation. Though the lame one did not fully understand my intentions, he waited with growing anticipation. He waited to see what new marvel I would create. The most primitive smelting apparatus in this world is finally complete, and with the charcoal finished by tomorrow, the furnace will be sufficiently dry to begin operations. Dazue and Hozi spent the entire day gathering several hundred sturdy white branches, perfect for crafting long spears. However, the men sent to fell trees have suffered. Despite a grueling day of labor, they managed to harvest fewer than 10 logs. The stone axes used for the task were chipped and broken, 3 in total. Yet, I instructed them to continue their efforts tomorrow, promising that those who excel will be rewarded with new equipment. Everyone appeared bewildered, as stone axes were the most advanced tools they had ever witnessed. What could possibly be more effective than a stone axe? Deep down, a flicker of anticipation began to take root. After the evening meal, the tribe settled into their usual period of leisure, while I busied myself melting wax over the campfire. Once it cooled, I used a bone knife to carve the wax into the shapes of various tools. These wax models were then tightly encased in clay, leaving only a small opening. Once the clay had thoroughly dried, I placed them into the fire to bake, melting the wax inside so it could be drained away. In this manner, I created a hollow clay casting mold. The thin layer of wax residue left on the inner walls would also serve to make removing the finished metal product much easier later on. Though the process is somewhat tedious, it is remarkably precise and ensures no material goes to waste. Any molten wax drained out can be solidified into blocks and reused for future castings. At daybreak the following morning, the tribesmen led the spirit blue horses away. Through my tireless indoctrination and persuasion, they have finally come to understand that beasts are not merely food, but can also serve as partners in labor. The 4 men, Da Zui and the others, remained behind. Their task for today was to operate the bellows for me. The pottery crafted by the lame man yesterday had finished firing, and today he assisted me. The lame man is quite ingenious, so I decided to instruct him in the methods of copper smelting. This work cannot be shouldered by me alone forever. Finding an apprentice is the wiser course of action. I approached the 4 furnaces and ignited 2 of them simultaneously. Da Mao and Mao worked the bellows, while Dazui and Ho Zi fed charcoal and crushed copper ore into the furnace. Driven by the bellows, the flames roared high from the furnace mouth in an instant. The ore within began to melt. The molten copper flowed down the channels to collect at the base, forming a solid mass mixed with slag. Beside it, the iron smelting process was also underway, proving even faster as it liquefied within minutes under the intense heat. Using branches, I retrieved 2 metal masses laden with impurities from the bottom of the furnace, before repeating the entire procedure. After 3 or 4 hours, I finally gathered a pile of impure copper and tin ore, then ignited the remaining 2 furnaces. Once the temperature rose sufficiently, I placed the raw copper and impure tin into their respective crucibles. Waiting for the metals to melt into a liquid state, I used a ceramic ladle to skim the layer of impurities from the surface. Next, using a prepared ceramic rod, I poured the purified molten copper into square clay molds and left them to cool. I repeated the same process for the molten tin. The cripple and the 4 children watched as the molten metal solidified. Unable to grasp the principles behind it, they gazed on in astonishment. Waiting until the copper and tin plates were no longer searing to the touch, I eagerly emptied the metal sheets out of the molds. It was midday, and the metal sheets reflected the sunlight with a brilliant, blinding glare. Everyone stood with mouths agape, staring at the metallic plates. They had never seen anything so beautiful, shimmering with such luster. Even Kubing, who had been playing nearby, was drawn to the sight. He reached out, touching this one and then the next. "Leader, what are these?" I ruffled his hair. "This is called copper. This is called tin. Stay here and keep watch. I am going to retrieve more supplies." Kubing nodded, and along with the cripple and the others, they softly recited the words copper and tin under their breath. I proceeded to carry over the remaining casting molds and crucibles. I immediately began the work of creating bronze, combining the copper and tin in the proper proportions within a new crucible. Once the mixture had melted into a liquid, I stirred it thoroughly with a ceramic rod before pouring it into the molds. The first items to be cast were axes and hammers. The searing molten alloy was poured into the molds. A plume of white smoke immediately rose from the vents left in the casting molds. After the temperature subsided slightly, I impatiently used a stone to shatter the clay mold. Amidst the fragments of broken clay, a large axe, gleaming with a faint golden hue, lay silently. This axe was slightly larger than the stone ones we had used previously. The task of sharpening the axe blade was entrusted to the cripple. Meanwhile, I began preparing to cast other implements. I crafted measuring tools, saws, carving knives, chisels, blades, hand drills, and even a 4-sided spearhead. By the time the clansmen returned at dusk, all work had ceased. The blade of the large golden axe had been honed to a brilliant razor-sharp shine. With the handle fitted, the world's first bronze axe was finally complete. There were also 2 saws fitted with wooden handles, one designed for individual use and the other for 2 people. Da Shu and the others saw the large axe shimmering with a golden luster and immediately gathered around, their eyes practically glued to it. "There is more," I said with a smile. I then produced a long spear tipped with refined bronze. The tribesmen were stunned. Was this truly a long spear? It was breathtakingly beautiful. Shu Ya and Duer in particular looked as if they were drooling at the sight of this refined bronze-tipped spear. "Leader, is there one for us as well?" A tribesman asked, unable to contain his impatience. I smiled and took out a chunk of copper ore, handing it to Da Shu. "It is crafted from this very stone. However, we have no more of this ore for now." The people of the Yuan Shu tribe were struck dumb. They had mined this stone before, but never imagined it could be forged into such exquisite weapons. Mu Dun was the most honest and straightforward among them. "If we have run out, we can simply go and mine more. We know where to find it." I nodded. I explained to them that their current method of excavation was far too inefficient. We must construct a few things first. Once this winter passes, we will be able to extract a vast amount. By then, every one of you shall possess a long spear such as this. Next, I taught them how to utilize the 2-man saw and the hand saw. The 2-man saw was placed against the trunk, and they began to pull it back and forth. Before long, a circular wooden slab was cut, and we then used the hand saw to clear the branches. A branch as thick as a wrist was severed in less than a minute. The large axe, about 1 meter in length, felt perfectly balanced in the hand. One could exert their full strength with a single swing. If a warrior with the strength of our tribe were to wield it, a tree as thick as a human thigh could likely be felled in just a few strikes. Once everyone had learned how to operate these tools, I instructed them to rest and eat. After the meal, the tribesmen gathered around to listen to the lame one recount the process of smelting copper. As for me, I began to establish various units of measurement. With standardized measures in place, we could gradually. The hemp harvest has now been fully gathered. The women are currently focused on braiding ropes. The children are lying outside the rabbit hutch, watching as the rabbits give birth. All 3 pregnant rabbits have delivered, with each litter unexpectedly yielding 6 to 7 offspring. The herd of over 30 rabbits has nearly doubled in size. Jik, who possesses extensive experience in pottery, is now fully capable of handling the wax carving tasks I have assigned. The solid bronze plow can be utilized for both excavation and agricultural cultivation. With the model I provided, replicating the design, much like drawing a tiger based on a cat, is a simple matter. As for me, having completed my own tasks, I have begun to research the most vital tool, the plow. I intend to craft 2 sizes, a large version for the giant elephant and a smaller one for Ma Ling to use. Once completed, both plowing the fields and excavating the riverbed will require their use. The following day, the women divided their duties between braiding ropes and clearing the ground in preparation for the livestock enclosure. The bronze smelting process now requires only Juazi and his 4 companions. The 5 of them work ceaselessly, casting copper and tin plates, seeking guidance whenever they encounter uncertainty. Once the women finished clearing the area, he led them to construct the perimeter fence. The timber harvested was cut into 4-meter lengths for support pillars, spaced 2 meters apart to form a rectangular enclosure. Inside stands a 4-meter-high wooden shed, serving as the small shelter for the young giant elephant. Once the construction was finalized, the mountain of gathered hay was tied into neat bundles. These were stacked securely within the enclosure to protect them from wild beasts and the predations of the cannibal tribe. Every member of his tribe fulfilled their duties, and the atmosphere was thick with intense, bustling energy. Yet no one was aware that the Tuding tribe had already set their sights upon them. At this moment, the Tuding tribe faced a troubling predicament. As the weather grew increasingly frigid, the stream upon which their tribe depended for survival was nearing exhaustion. They would soon be forced to travel 3 kilometers to the small river for water, a task that required a significant number of containers for transport. This was the true reason he had personally visited to trade with our tribe previously, to acquire more pottery. Regrettably, his desires went unfulfilled, leading him to harbor intentions of blatant plunder. In the eyes of Tuding, our tribe possessed fewer than 10 adult males, while his own forces numbered 15. Furthermore, since his departure from our tribe, he had fashioned spears tipped with sharpened stone. He believed that overcoming you, seizing your pottery, and pillaging your food would be a trivial matter. That very morning, Tuding led every adult male of his tribe, each brandishing several spears, as they marched aggressively toward our tribe. They prepared to strike down your hunting party in a single blow, intending to storm your dwelling and plunder everything in sight. At this moment, within the coniferous forest on the mountainside, Dashu and Thuna were still felling trees. They were working with great efficiency today, utilizing 3 large axes and 2 long saws. It took them barely half an hour to produce a clean, finished log. Furthermore, this was merely the pace of a single team. There were 10 men in total assigned to logging, divided into 3 teams, meaning they could fell 3 trees simultaneously every 30 minutes. The remaining man, Mokdon, was responsible for logistics. At that moment, he was leading the blue horses to graze near the worksite. Just then, from the mountain ridge across the valley, a group of men suddenly charged forward, each brandishing a spear. Mokdon immediately shouted a warning toward the hillside and hauled the blue horses back in retreat. Hearing the cry, the workers ceased their labor, immediately drawing their weapons to prepare for battle. Tokdin led his men in close pursuit, closing the distance all the way to the mountainside. With several sharp whistles of wind, the 2 rearmost blue horses were struck by spears, letting out miserable wails before collapsing to the ground. The 4 other horses, still tethered to them, panicked and bolted, dragging the carcasses of their fallen companions along, racing directly toward the tribe's grazing grounds. The tribesmen, witnessing this, retrieved their stone axes from their backs and hurled them forward. With a series of sharp thuds, 3 of the enemy immediately fell, 2 others were wounded, leaving only 10 men continuing the charge. Tokdin was absolutely enraged and immediately ordered another volley of spears. But Dashu and the others had already taken cover behind the trees, causing all the spears to embed themselves harmlessly into the earth. Dokni, Kwangtrong, and the others emerged from behind the trees, launching their own spears in a coordinated volley. 4 more of Tokdin's tribesmen were brought down. The survivors, seeing this, were struck with terror and scrambled to hide behind the trees. Dokni and his men also retreated behind cover, bracing for the enemy's next assault. Yet a long silence followed and no further movement could be heard. They did not know that by now Tokdin was paralyzed by fear. The enemies before him were far too formidable. Moreover, he realized that the opposing tribe possessed more men than he had anticipated. His own side was now reduced to 8, including 2 who were injured. To continue the engagement was clearly impossible. He immediately ordered the remaining men to retreat toward their cave. At the same time, Tuhook led the protagonists before the 2 giant elephants, requesting that he name them. He named the larger one Huishan. The smaller one was named Ru Bao. Just as he was about to speak, Huishan looked toward the west and suddenly raised its head to let out a resonant roar. Tuhook was caught off guard, startled by the sudden outburst. He immediately gazed toward the west, only to see 4 blue horses pulling the carcasses of 2 of their own kin. They were galloping straight toward him. Several spears were protruding from the bodies of the blue horses, yet the woodcutting party was nowhere to be seen. Startled, he immediately ordered all the clansmen to hide inside the cave, instructing them that no one was to emerge until his return. Once everything was settled, he grasped his bow and spear, mounted Huizon's back, and rode toward the west. Seeing this, Rubao immediately followed, tracking the bloodstains left by the blue horses on the ground. Huizon galloped with the speed of a storm, and in no time at all they had entered the forest. Suddenly, a group of people appeared in front. The men leading them carried golden axes. It was Daisu and his companions. He was stunned. Why were they all here, and why did none of them appear to be injured? Shuya immediately led the hunting party to his side and recounted the entire situation that had just transpired. Hearing the report, he could not help but wonder why the Topknot tribe had launched an attack against his own. But regardless of the motive, anyone who dared to harm his people would pay the price. Even harming his blue horses would not be forgiven. Without delay, he brandished his spear, rallied the men of the woodcutting party, and charged toward the Topknot tribe. It was not until past 2 in the afternoon that they arrived at the territory of the Topknot tribe. The clearing at the mouth of the cave was devoid of life, and the entrance was blocked by a massive boulder, though a significant gap remained. Several pairs of eyes were peeking out cautiously from within, and the Topknot leader was among them. He had feared that the enemy would seek vengeance, and he dreaded that his fears had manifested into reality. The enemy had truly arrived, and with such an intimidating formation. The man leading them held a gleaming, sharp-tipped spear. Beneath him he rode a long-snouted beast that stood taller than a man. At this moment, the Topknot leader was filled with profound regret. Had he known the enemy possessed such strength, he would never have provoked this conflict. Our protagonist noticed the eyes spying from the cave, and he immediately drew the longbow from his back. He drew the string and released an arrow. The next instant, a shrill scream pierced the air as the Topknot leader was struck through the eye. Dali Shitaliuji moved the boulder aside. He pointed at the massive rock sealing the cave entrance and issued the order to the 3 men. They stepped forward and began to push, but despite their combined strength, they could not budge it and were instead pushed back by the resistance. Damn it, they think a rock is enough to seal their fate? He walked up to the gap and knocked another arrow. Behind the boulder, several grown men were straining to hold it in place. He notched yet another arrow. This time, 2 men behind the entrance were struck down and the others, gripped by terror, fled, no longer daring to stand near the opening. With that, Dali and his companions successfully pushed the boulder aside. Behind the rock lay 3 men who were still clinging to life. They had been crushed into a bloody pulp. The entrance to the cave was pushed open, revealing a flickering pale yellow light within, where a group of women and children huddled in terror amongst a pile of hay. Of the 5 remaining adult men, 3 stood guard with spears, while the 2 previously wounded men groaned amidst the grass. He stepped inside, wielding his long spear. Deshu and the others followed closely behind, their golden axes drawn. A group of women and children were trembling, hiding within a pile of hay. The 5 remaining adult men stood before them. 3 held spears as a defensive line, while the 2 who had been wounded earlier were groaning in the grass. He withdrew a long spear tipped with refined bronze. The clansmen stared in utter astonishment. Was this truly a spear? It was breathtakingly beautiful. Shuya and Duger in particular looked upon the refined bronze-tipped spear with such envy that they could barely contain their salivation. Leader, is there one for us as well? One clansman asked, his voice thick with anticipation. I smiled and produced a chunk of copper ore, handing it to Dashu. It is crafted from this stone, though we have no more of it for now. The people of the Yuanshu tribe were stunned. They had once mined this stone themselves, never imagining it could be forged into something of such exquisite craftsmanship. Mudun, the most honest and straightforward among them, spoke up. If we have none left, we simply need to go back and mine more. We know where to find it. I nodded, explaining that their current method of mining was inefficient and that they must first prepare specific tools. Once winter passed, they would be able to extract a vast amount. By then, every one of you shall possess a spear such as this. Next, I taught them how to operate the crosscut saws and hand saws. We placed the 2-man crosscut saw atop a log and began to pull it back and forth. In moments, a circular wooden slab was severed, and using the 1-man hand saw to clear the branches, a branch the size of a wrist was cut through in less than a minute. The large meter-long axe was also remarkably easy to wield, allowing for the full utilization of one's physical strength with every swing. If utilized by one of the tribe's strongest warriors, a tree as thick as a human thigh could likely be felled in just a few strikes. Once everyone had mastered these tools, I instructed them to eat and rest. After the meal, the clansmen gathered to listen to the lame man recount the tales of bronze smelting. Meanwhile, I began to establish various units of measurement. With standardized systems in place, we could gradually cultivate the foundations of civilization. The hemp plants had now all been gathered. The women were currently focused on the task of weaving rope. The children lay prone outside the rabbit hutch, watching as the rabbits within gave birth. All 3 pregnant rabbits had successfully delivered, with each litter surprisingly producing 6 or 7 kits. The flock of over 30 rabbits had now nearly doubled in size. The man with long-standing experience in pottery was now tasked with wax carving, a role he could capably fulfill. Solid bronze tools were versatile, proving equally effective for both excavation and agricultural tasks. With the master patterns I provided, following the model was a simple matter of drawing a tiger based on a cat. Once my own duties were concluded, I turned my attention to the most vital project, the plow. I intended to craft two versions, a large one for the giant elephant and a smaller one for Ma Ling to utilize. When the time came, they would be indispensable for tilling the earth and excavating riverbeds. The following day, the women cleared the ground, preparing the site for the construction of the livestock pens. The smelting of bronze now required only Juezi and his 4 companions to manage. The 5 of them worked tirelessly casting bronze and tin plates, seeking guidance whenever they encountered a hurdle. Once the women had finished clearing the area, I led them to begin erecting the perimeter fence. The felled timber was cut into 4-meter sections to serve as pillars, spaced 2 meters apart to form a rectangular enclosure. Within the perimeter stood a 4-meter-high wooden shed, serving as the small shelter for the young giant elephant. With the construction complete, the mountain of gathered grass was bundled into organized stacks. These were neatly stored within the enclosure to protect them from wild beasts or raiding cannibalistic tribes. Every member of the tribe fulfilled their duties with diligence, their spirits burning with intense fervor. None of them were aware that, at this very moment, the Top-Knot tribe had begun to cast greedy eyes upon their settlement. The Top-Knot tribe was currently facing a grave predicament. As the weather grew increasingly frigid, the stream upon which their tribe depended for survival was nearing depletion. Soon they would be forced to travel 3 kilometers to the small river for water, a task that demanded a vast array of containers. This was precisely why their leader had visited our tribe previously, to acquire more pottery. Alas, his desires were not met, and thus a nefarious plan for outright plunder took root. In the mind of the Top-Knot leader, our tribe possessed fewer than 10 adult men, while his forces numbered 15. Furthermore, since his last departure from our lands, he had fashioned spears tipped with sharpened stone. He felt certain that overwhelming our tribe and seizing our pottery and provisions would be a trivial affair. That morning, the Top-Knot leader led every able-bodied man from his tribe, each brandishing their stone spears, marching aggressively toward our territory, prepared to strike down our hunting party in a single decisive blow before descending upon our settlement to pillage at will. Meanwhile, deep within the coniferous forest on the mountainside, Dashu and Shuya continued their work felling trees. They were moving with remarkable efficiency today, armed with 3 great axes and 2 long saws. It took essentially only half an hour to obtain a clean, rounded log. Furthermore, this was merely the efficiency of a single group. There were 10 people in the logging party, divided into 3 teams, meaning they could fell 3 trees simultaneously every 30 minutes. The remaining member, Mu-Dun, was tasked with transport. He was currently guiding the blue horses to graze near the logging site. At that very moment, a mob of people suddenly rushed down from the mountain opposite the valley, each wielding a spear in their hands. Mu-Dun immediately shouted toward the hillside before pulling the blue horses to retreat. Upon hearing the cry, the men immediately ceased their work, seizing their weapons in preparation for battle. Top-Knot led his men in close pursuit, charging all the way to the hillside. With several piercing whistles through the air, the 2 trailing blue horses were struck by spears, letting out a harrowing shriek before collapsing to the ground. The 4 other horses, tethered together with them, continued to gallop at full speed, dragging the carcasses of their 2 fallen companions, and dashed straight toward the tribe's grazing grounds. The members of the tribe, seeing this, drew the stone axes from their backs and hurled them forward. With the sound of several whistling projectiles, 3 of the enemy immediately fell. 2 others were wounded, leaving only 10 men to continue the assault. Top-Knot was consumed by fury and immediately ordered another volley of spears. However, Dashu and the others had already taken cover behind the trees, causing the spears to strike harmlessly into the earth. Duer, Qiangzhuang, and the others emerged from behind the trees, launching their own spears in a coordinated strike. 4 more men from Top-Knot's tribe collapsed. The remaining attackers, overcome by terror, scrambled to hide behind the tree trunks. Duer and his men also took cover, awaiting the enemy's next move, yet a long silence followed. They were unaware that Top-Knot had been shaken to his very core. The enemy standing before him was far too formidable. Moreover, he realized that the opposing tribe possessed strength far beyond his initial estimation. His own force was now reduced to 8 men, 2 of whom were wounded. Continuing the engagement would surely lead to their ruin. He immediately signaled his remaining men to flee back toward the caves. At the same time, Xiaoshu had led him to the 2 giant elephants, eager for him to bestow names upon them. He named the larger one Huishan. The smaller one was named Ru Bao. Just as he was about to speak, Huishan gazed toward the west and suddenly raised its head to let out a resonant trumpet. Xiaoshu was startled by the sudden outburst. He immediately turned his gaze toward the west, only to see 4 blue horses dragging the corpse. The 2 blue horses remained, still pierced by spears, yet the wood-cutting party was nowhere to be seen. Struck by a sudden realization, he hurriedly ordered all his tribesmen to retreat into the cave, commanding that no one emerge until his return. Once everything was settled, he gripped his bow and long spear, mounted Huisan, and rode toward the west. Rubao, witnessing this, immediately gave chase, tracking the bloodstains left by the blue horses on the earth. Huisan carried him forward with the speed of a gale, and within moments they had entered the forest. Suddenly, a group of people emerged ahead. Those leading carried golden axes. It was Dashu and the others. He stood stunned. Why were they all here? Moreover, none among them appeared to have suffered any injuries. Shuya promptly led the hunting party to his side, recounting the entire situation that had just transpired. As he listened, he could not help but wonder why the Tuding tribe had launched an attack on his own people. But regardless of the reason, anyone who dared to harm his kin must pay the price. Even if it were merely the death of the blue horses, it would not be forgiven. Without hesitation, he brandished his long spear and led the woodcutting team toward the Tuding tribe's encampment. It was past 2 in the afternoon when they finally arrived at the Tuding territory. The clearing before the cave entrance was desolate, and the entrance itself was sealed by a massive boulder, though a significant gap remained. Several pairs of eyes were peering furtively from within, and Tuding was among them. He had feared nothing more than a retaliatory strike, and now that very dread had manifested before him. The enemy had truly come, and they arrived with such a formidable presence. The one leading them held a gleaming long spear in his hand. Beneath him he rode a long-nosed beast standing taller than a man. Tuding felt a surge of profound regret. Had he known the adversary possessed such power, he never would have sought conflict. Noticing the eyes spying from the cave, he unslung the long bow from his back, nocked an arrow, and drew the string. A heartbeat later, a miserable shriek pierced the air as an arrow struck Tuding square in the eye. Dali Shidu Luzi, move that boulder. He pointed his spear at the massive rock sealing the entrance and issued his command to the 3 men. They surged forward, throwing their weight against the stone, but despite their collective effort, it barely budged. Instead, they were forced backward. Damnation, do they think a rock is enough to save them? He approached the gap once more and nocked another arrow. Behind the boulder, several men were still straining against the stone when he released his next shot. This time, 2 men behind the entrance were skewered. Seeing this, the others fled in terror, daring not to linger at the cave mouth. With the path cleared, Dali and his companions successfully pushed the boulder aside. Behind the rock lay 3 bodies, still twitching, their forms crushed and mangled until in an instant their final breaths escaped them. As the entrance was fully unsealed, a faint, flickering yellow light spilled from within the cave. A group of women and children huddled in a pile of grass, trembling in fear. Of the remaining 5 adult men, 3 stood with spears to block their path, while the 2 who had been injured previously groaned amidst the tall grass. He stepped forward, his long spear firmly in his grasp. Dashu and the others followed closely behind, their golden axes drawn. A group of women and children huddled together in the grass, trembling in fear. The remaining 5 adult men, 3 of whom held spears, stood before them while the 2 injured men groaned in the grass. He entered with his spear in hand, Dashu and the others trailing behind with their golden axes. The 3 spearmen stared at the aggressive group, their legs shaking uncontrollably as they stammered, seemingly pleading for mercy. Damn it all, who pleads for their life while still clutching a weapon? With a swift movement of his spear, he struck the weapons from their hands, sending the spears clattering to the ground. One of the wounded men in the back stealthily picked up a stone, foolishly attempting to mount a resistance. In the blink of an eye, the spear tip flashed forward with a sickening thud. It pierced through his chest. Everyone, on your knees. Anyone who resists will be executed. He glared at them and roared with such intensity that their legs turned to jelly, and they collapsed onto the ground. Dashu, go and seize all of their food reserves. He then turned his gaze toward the group cowering on the ground. It was your leader who attacked us first, so do not blame me for this. If it were not for him, I would never have laid a hand on any of you. His initial intention was to assimilate this group, but to ensure they harbored no resentment, he shifted all the blame onto their leader. However, he had clearly overestimated their loyalty to their tribe. They cared nothing for the fate of their leader. Their only concern was the food being taken from them. The women watched in despair as Dashu and his men hauled away their meat stores, weeping and begging for mercy. He looked upon them with cold indifference. So long as you join my tribe, there will be food in abundance, and no one shall perish from the cold when winter arrives. Whoever wishes to join may step behind me now. No sooner had the words left his lips than several people scrambled to their feet to stand behind him. Then came the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th. Before long, only 1 man remained, lying where he had fallen due to his severe injuries. It was clear from his condition that he would not survive much longer. Choosing to leave him behind, he led the new tribesmen out of the cave and commanded Shuya to set it ablaze. From that moment on, Tuding and his tribe vanished like smoke in the wind. Upon returning to his tribe, the integration of the newcomers proceeded smoothly. Within the tribe were several people who had previously been traded from Tuding's camp. They integrated quickly, and as he had promised, he did not deceive them. The tribe's food reserves were truly immense, and with the addition of the recent spoils of war, there would be no issue feeding 200 people throughout the entire winter, though the cavern's storage capacity had already reached its limit. Fortunately, as winter approached, plastering the walls would provide much-needed warmth. What left the newcomers astonished was that his tribe actually raised wild beasts, particularly colossal monsters like Rubao and Huishan. This gave them a new perspective on the formidable strength of his tribe. They now felt a deep sense of pride in becoming members of his tribe. For the past few days, the women had been weaving rope with several large coils now stacked within the cave. The men continued to fell trees. The trunks were kept as construction material while the branches were used as firewood for the furnaces. He had not remained idle during these days, crafting various essential carpentry tools and casting 50 bronze shovels. With excavation tools now at hand, the first phase of his artificial canal project had to begin. He used an exceptionally long rope, woven by the women, as a measuring line to first plot the location of the northern cave wall. Then at the four corners of the designated area, he placed wooden stakes as markers to determine the optimal route for the river. Next was the construction of the brick kiln. Once the river excavation began, it would produce a massive amount of mud and earth. Therefore, he planned to conduct the river digging and the production of raw bricks simultaneously. Since he intended to fire blue bricks, a process requiring significant amounts of water, the kiln had to be placed for easy water access. The site for the brick kiln was chosen on the banks of the small river. Juezi had fired a large quantity of red brick some time ago. These bricks were perfectly suited for building the kiln itself. Constructing the cylindrical kiln required the mobilization of the entire tribe's labor force, taking 5 full days to complete, followed by additional time to craft several brick molds. Only then could the preparatory work be considered finished. By this time, many days had already passed. The plow forged through many days of labor was finally unveiled. Beneath a 2-meter-wide wooden frame sat 4 bronze plowshares. With this implement, one pass could till a 2-meter-wide plot of land to a depth of 40 centimeters. As for the motive power to drive this machine, it was naturally Ru Bao and Hui Shan. With 2 plows placed side by side, they pulled forward, carving out a 4-meter-wide trench in their wake. In less than an hour, the beasts had finished a 700-meter-long trench, reaching a depth of 40 centimeters. Seeing this, he was as jubilant as if he had struck gold. At this rate, perhaps his construction plan would not. Regarding the brickmaking, he decided to delay the task until the arrival of winter. During that time, everyone would be idle, and the warmth of the kiln would be a welcome relief against the winter chill. It would truly be a pleasant endeavor. However, a pressing problem stood before him. Because these raw bricks were intended to face the outer walls of the rammed earth fortifications, every single one of them was massive in size. Transporting the clay and the raw bricks would consume a significant amount of time. Thus, he resolved to immediately set his hands to crafting a simple wheelbarrow. A new project had commenced. Finding assistants was naturally the first order of business. In time, they could even become the professional carpenters of the tribe. Within the tribe, the one with the greatest aptitude for carpentry was undoubtedly Mu Yong. Back when he was in the previous tribe, this man had conceived a way to use hot coals to burn out a solid log to create a hollow container. The other man was Mu Dun, a truly honest and simple-minded soul. This person rarely spoke to anyone, but his work was always remarkably solid and reliable. Drawing upon his memories of carts and carriages from his previous life, while incorporating further improvements, the 3 of them labored for an entire day, and the very first wheelbarrow was brought into existence. It was immediately handed over to the construction team for use. Everyone was fascinated by this newly unveiled transport tool. Compared to carrying loads on their shoulders or by hand, it was certainly far less strenuous, yet he remained far from optimistic. He noticed that the wheelbarrow wobbled incessantly to the left and right while turning. At this rate, it would fall apart in no time. Having identified the flaw, he immediately began to implement improvements. The focus was primarily on extending the wheel axle. After clearly instructing his 2 assistants, the 3 of them took up their respective tasks. This round of refinement proceeded much faster than the initial construction. 2 hours later, the second generation of the wheelbarrow made its debut. This time, the vehicle no longer swayed from side to side. The efficiency of the workers surged immediately. Consequently, the second model was chosen as the standard for mass production, and they began manufacturing them in large quantities. The first batch consisted of 30 units. At present, counting both men and women, there were certainly several dozen able-bodied adults in the tribe. This type of wheelbarrow was designed specifically for hauling earth and would undoubtedly see extensive use in the future. Throughout the following period, the trio of carpenters equipped the construction team at a pace of 3 wheelbarrows every 2 days. The first phase of the Yinshui River project was progressing at a breakneck speed. The brickmaking work, previously delayed, also saw its progress accelerate significantly thanks to the constant arrival of these new wheelbarrows. By the 18th day since the commencement of the work, a canal stretching 698 meters in length and 4 meters in depth lay before his eyes. At this juncture, he ordered the excavation to cease, leaving the final 2 meters untouched until the need for water delivery arose. The tribespeople returned to their customary rhythms of life. The men continued to fell timber to stockpile for future construction, while the women returned to foraging for food. They operated under the belief that one could never have too much in reserve. The production of the 30-coat key carts had also reached completion. In anticipation of the large-scale copper mining operations to come, Muyong and Mudun were currently following his directives, attempting to construct a larger carriage designed for horse-drawn travel. Both men had gained valuable experience from their previous 2 attempts. He provided them with the blueprints for a 4-wheeled cart and left them to refine the mechanics themselves. As for him, he dedicated his time to the crafting of improved tools. Everyone remained occupied with their respective tasks, working in an orderly fashion. That morning, as he emerged from the cave, his vision was consumed by a vast, blinding whiteness. The long-awaited winter had finally descended upon them. Snow fell as thick as goose down, incessant and heavy, while the sky groaned with a low rumbling tempest. With no end to the snowfall in sight, the men ceased their logging, and everyone retreated into the shelter of the caves. The women, too, no longer ventured out in frantic search of forage. In such harsh conditions, brick firing was impossible. They could only wait for the snow to cease before planning their next move. Thus, he began to set his long-nurtured plan into motion. He sought to standardize a common language and script for the tribe. In truth, the tribe's people had already mastered a modest vocabulary, particularly the youth, Kuben. The boy was already capable of articulating several simple sentences. This made the task significantly more manageable. He only needed to teach the tribe a few more essential terms and then weave them together into coherent communication. As for the written script, teaching them simplified characters at this stage was not practical. Clerical script, being the closest to pictographic characters, would be far easier for them to grasp. Whether they could write was of secondary importance. The priority was ensuring they could recognize the characters on sight. To bolster their resolve, he decreed that a review would be held every day before the evening meal. Those who could not recite the lesson would have their rations halved, while those who excelled would be granted rewards. This maneuver proved highly effective. The tribe's people were suddenly full of vigor, particularly the children. Even after the lessons ended, the youths would gather in small groups of their own volition to practice. Several days later, the snow finally relented and the brick-firing operation officially commenced. After he personally demonstrated the construction of 2 kilns, he entrusted the remainder of the labor to his tribespeople. They were not required to toil every single day. Most of the labor involved simply loading the bricks into the kiln and removing the finished products, while the rest of the time was spent waiting for the firing and cooling processes. Life drifted by day after day as he dedicated his spare time to learning their language and their unique characters. Every few days, the kiln was emptied. It was a simple yet fulfilling existence. During their idle hours, the tribe members would craft various ornaments to adorn themselves, most of whom were men, fashioning necklaces out of bones, or decorating themselves with feathers and various other trinkets. He did not understand the reasoning behind this until the elder eventually explained it to him. To prevent inbreeding from leading to the degradation of their lineage, many tribes would gather at the beginning of spring to hold a matchmaking assembly. If a woman found a man to her liking, she would follow him back to his tribe. The standard for this judgment was based on his physical strength, the might of his tribe, and the abundance of their food stores. These attributes could be easily observed through the bone ornaments a man wore. If a man carried an exceptionally large femur as a weapon, it served as proof that his tribe possessed the strength to hunt formidable beasts, which naturally indicated that his tribe did not suffer from a lack of food. These words gave him an idea, as he felt that he himself was lacking in such ornamentation. He had absolutely no interest in those crude bone necklaces. After much contemplation, he decided to craft an accessory known as a headband. The materials for these headbands were primarily transparent jade or animal hide, with each person using a unique material to distinguish themselves. Since ancient times, gold has always been a symbol of nobility. His tribe lacked gold, so his own crown was crafted from intricately carved bronze. Having adorned himself, he could not leave the heads of his tribesmen bare, and so he used tin to fashion a silver-colored one for Shu. Shu was delighted, and under his guidance, the other adult men began crafting their own headbands from various materials, including hide, wood, bone, and even decorative hairpins. From that point on, the tribe established a new set of customs. Children were permitted only to tie their hair back or wear simple headbands, but were forbidden from using hairpins. Adult men were permitted to wear headbands and were required to wear hairpins to distinguish the adults from the minors. Women were no longer restricted to wearing simple ponytails. Adult women were required to wear their hair in buns, using wooden hairpins or ornamental clasps as accessories. Young unmarried girls were permitted to wear ponytails, leave their hair loose or braided. Metal is a strategic resource. It cannot be squandered by everyone as mere adornment. Therefore, he utilized these metal ornaments as a system of rewards. Any tribesman who contributes to the prosperity of the tribe now has the opportunity to earn them. Following a series of reforms, he can now determine a person's status, rank, and age simply by observing their headwear, or ascertain what contributions they have rendered to the tribe. The headband worn by the child was also crafted by his own hand. Upon it rests a bronze emblem with cloud patterns bestowed upon the boy for being the fastest to master the written characters. Being the first among the children to possess a metal ornament, he was filled with boundless joy. He went to great lengths to produce such ornaments, not merely to distinguish the status of his tribesmen, but primarily for the upcoming matchmaking assembly. It is not for the sake of finding a mate, but to facilitate meetings with other tribes to explore potential trade opportunities. Previously, his tribe relied entirely on trading with the Tuding tribe for salt. However, the Tuding tribe is no more. Thus, before he can locate a salt mine, he must seek out a new supplier. One must realize that the pottery produced by the Han tribe is of immense value. He intends not only to exchange pottery for salt, but also to acquire more laborers for his tribe. Relying solely on the natural reproduction of these fewer than 200 people would not be enough to fill his city even by the next lifetime. However, not every tribe is as fortunate as his. They do not have to worry about the scarcity of food and are able to leisurely deliberate on grand developmental plans for the future of their tribe. Take, for instance, the Black Mouse tribe to his east, a medium-sized settlement with a population of over 150. They possess a significant difference compared to his own tribe. The Black Mouse tribe maintains its own unique faith. They worship the Black Mouse and possess a shaman tasked with communing with the spirits. This winter, the Black Mouse shaman claimed to have received a divine revelation, warning that the winter would be longer than in previous years. Fearing that their food reserves would not last until spring, he urged the chieftain to lead a hunting party in search of provisions. Consequently, the chieftain of the Black Mouse tribe, Shuda, led 19 of his brethren out to hunt. Very quickly, they encountered something peculiar. At the edge of the forest to the west of their tribe, plumes of thick black smoke could be seen rising every few days. The river was too wide for them to cross, so they had never ventured that far before. Now, witnessing the source of the smoke near the riverbank, Shuda immediately reported the situation to the Black Mouse shaman. The shaman was not surprised. On the contrary, he found the act of these people setting fires quite intriguing. In the limited understanding of the old shaman, fire is used solely for roasting food. Constant fire suggests they possess a vast abundance of food. If it were merely for warmth, why would they keep it burning so incessantly? The Black Rat shaman, overcome with suspicion, ordered the rat men to investigate the situation. He suggested that if the opportunity arose, they should attempt to trade with the strangers. Perhaps, he mused, there was even some knowledge to be gained from them. Thus, Shudai led his scouting party out to fulfill this diplomatic mission. Back at the tribe, Muyang and Luji were tending to the brick kiln. With nothing else to occupy them, they watched the flames dancing within the furnace. Every so often, they would toss another bundle of firewood into the fire. The two of them had been fueling the kiln continuously from the previous night until this very afternoon. By now, the raw bricks inside had been fired until they were a blinding, incandescent red. It was finally time to douse the fire and seal the kiln. Muyang patted Luji on the shoulder and instructed him to return to the cave and summon the others to assist with the work. Luji nodded and sprinted back toward the cave without looking back. However, just as Muyang was left alone to guard the kiln, a loud, frantic roar from the meatball suddenly shook the ground. Shortly after, the sounds of the meatball sprinting for its life echoed through the area, followed by the sharp, desperate cries of men in pursuit. Muyang hurriedly climbed up from the firing pit to the surface. No sooner had he poked his head out than he saw over a dozen spears whistling through the air toward the meatball, which was fleeing toward the cave on all fours. He had been preparing to lead his tribesmen to douse the kiln. Instead, the moment he emerged from the cave, he was met with the sight of the meatball being hunted down. Shudai and his men had intended to give chase, but upon seeing Muyang emerge from the cave leading a group of warriors, they were instantly frozen in their tracks. Damnation, who dares to hunt my meatball? Everyone, take up your weapons. Hearing the command of their leader, the clansmen roared and 70 to 80 men charged out. Each of them gripped their weapons tightly, swiftly surrounding Shudai's group. Shudai stood gapey. The men before him all looked like vicious, bloodthirsty demons. Their leader was a cold-faced young man, his hair adorned with a golden hairpin, holding a golden spear and glaring daggers at him. The formation behind him was even more dazzling. Every warrior held a polished, gleaming bronze shovel. Setting aside their actual combat prowess for a moment, the sheer opulence of their equipment alone was enough to strike such terror into Shudai's party that they dared not move a muscle. At this moment, the meatball caught sight of its master. Realizing the situation was now under control, it trotted back to his side. Standing behind Ban, Galmon put on a display of borrowed authority, barking a sharp command at Shuda. Ban tapped the creature's nose to signal it to stay calm, then turned to address Shuda. This beast belongs to us. Why did you attack it? Shuda was momentarily stunned, though it was clear that Ban shared a deep familiarity with this monster. He had never expected that a neighboring tribe would possess the ability to control a beast of such magnitude. Yet what truly caught him off guard was Hui Shan, a beast even larger than Ru Bao. Having heard the commotion, it had arrived on the scene. It stood beside Ru Bao, peering curiously at the group who had been cornered. Shuda and his subordinates were terrified to the point of losing their composure. There was yet another one. Seeing the bewilderment on their faces, Ban frowned and instructed the elder by his side to ask who they were and why they had come. The elder stepped forward, gesturing as he spoke to Shuda, translating Ban's words while introducing his status as the tribe leader. Upon hearing the elder, Shuda immediately began to offer frantic apologies. He claimed that he had no idea this monster had an owner. His intention had been to hunt it to ensure his tribe could survive the winter. Finally, he tearfully revealed the true purpose of his arrival. Ban had not expected that they had come seeking to trade for food. However, if they truly possessed something that caught his interest, a deal was not out of the question. Then, what do you have to offer in exchange? Shuda hesitated for a moment, then asked, may we trade with stone basins? After all, our tribe has several, and stone basins are essential items for every tribe. Before Ban could respond, the elder spoke up. Our tribe has an abundance of stone basins. If you desire them, you may bring goods to trade. Salt or other items would both be acceptable. Now it was Shuda's turn to be dumbfounded. The opposing tribe actually possessed so many stone basins, and were even willing to trade them. Seeing Shuda's disbelief, the elder beckoned for some children to bring out a set of pottery. With 2 minutes, the children emerged carrying a water jar, a cooking pot, and several bowls. A few nosy onlookers, relishing the spectacle, even brought out a bowl of meat broth, sipping it noisily by the cave entrance. The sight left Shuda completely stupefied. He had never smelled meat so fragrant, so Ban had someone serve him a bowl of the broth. After all, without tasting the broth, how could one truly understand the utility of the pottery? Shuda cautiously raised the bowl, imitating the child's actions as he took a sip, instantly feeling a warmth spread from his throat down to his stomach. A moment later, his entire body was suffused with heat. This meat broth was something Ban had. The pot contained little meat, yet it was rich with pork bones and chili peppers. Sipping a few mouthfuls during an idle moment was an experience of absolute bliss. Tudai was instantly conquered by the flavor of this broth and decided then and there to trade people for a ceramic pot. As for salt, it was a substance they had never even heard of. The elder reiterated the previous rate for pottery exchange, 1 ceramic pot for 2 adolescent boys or 1 adult woman. This price was in Tudai's eyes still acceptable. However, he had brought neither women nor children on this expedition, yet he possessed a desperate desire to return with a pot. With little choice, he brazenly asked, "Might you allow me to take the pot now, and I shall deliver the people upon my next visit?" Hearing this, you were immediately displeased. Credit transactions were out of the question. In this life, such dealings were unacceptable. Should the other party renege on their debt, would you not be reduced to a fool, swindled out of your goods? Seeing your refusal, Tudai took a bulging animal skin pouch from his subordinate and presented it to you. Within this lies food. Though the quantity is small, I hope it is enough to allow us to take the ceramic pot today. Next time we shall return with people to settle the debt for this pot. Do you truly believe a man of my standing craves such meager scraps? You opened the pouch casually, casting a disinterested glance inside, but to your astonishment, your eyes were immediately transfixed. Could these truly be peanuts? A cascade of culinary possibilities flooded your mind: roasted peanuts, salted peanuts, crispy fried peanuts, and peanut butter. This was, without a doubt, a treasure. Beyond their high nutritional value, the most vital aspect was their potential for extracting oil. If one were to cultivate a vast field of them, a shortage of cooking oil would be a thing of the past. Furthermore, with oil and fat, one could produce soap, candles, and perhaps even gunpowder. It was no exaggeration to label peanuts a strategic resource. You suppressed your mounting excitement, taking a long moment to regain your composure. Where did you acquire this? Tudai stammered for a moment, gesturing wildly with his hands. It was then you realized that the deity their tribe worshipped was the black dragon mouse, and these peanuts were excavated from the mouse's burrows. They knew exactly where to locate burrows containing peanuts, meaning that within their tribe, the crop was not a rare commodity. You nodded inwardly and gestured to a large basket. A basket filled with these peanuts will suffice to trade for the pottery, provided the shells remain intact. Tudai could hardly believe his ears. You had offered such generous terms. He agreed with frantic delight, promising to bring a much larger quantity next time. In the end, Tudai departed with the large basket, a ceramic pot, a ceramic bowl, and a spoon you had gifted him. Watching their retreating figures, a sudden chill washed over you. You had been caught off guard, allowing an unfamiliar tribe to infiltrate the very entrance of your cave. Fortunately, their numbers were not significant. Had they come specifically to launch an assault on his tribe, even if his people could repel them, there would inevitably have been casualties. You had previously drafted plans to construct defensive fortifications. Yet a massive wall of such magnitude cannot be erected at a moment's notice. During this period of vulnerability, there must be a defensive structure that can be relied upon immediately. You instructed Maibao to lead men to fetch water for the brick kiln, while you remained at the cave entrance to deliberate. The brick kiln had been firing for 2 months, and by now a massive stockpile of finished bricks had been accumulated. The construction of the city walls was not scheduled to begin until the spring of the coming year. Did that not mean that this vast quantity of bricks was currently sitting idle? As this thought crossed your mind, a design for a simple, rapidly constructible defensive barrier materialized in your thoughts. At the break of dawn the following day, you gathered all the adults together, informing them of your intention to erect 3 walls to enclose the cave entrance, leaving only a singular entrance, 2 meters wide, facing the east. The gate would be reinforced by a 3-meter-high cheval de frise to serve as the main barricade. The front face was to be reinforced with 4 layers of long spears bound in parallel. This rudimentary defensive perimeter was to be constructed directly using blue bricks. In such frigid weather, one only need pour water over the laid bricks to bind them firmly in ice. When the weather warms in the coming spring and the ice melts, these bricks can be reclaimed to build the main city walls, ensuring absolutely no waste of resources. Furthermore, while other tribes were still consuming raw meat and wild grasses, you had already led your tribe to feast on fresh soup and roasted meat. Not only did they enjoy the aroma of white rice, but they also wielded weapons centuries ahead of their time, all due to the transcendent, specialized skills you possessed. Upon your return to the primeval era, the sudden appearance of the Black Rat tribe made you realize the lurking dangers. Consequently, you resolved to construct a defensive fortification for your tribe. At the break of dawn the following day, you gathered all the adults together, informing them of your intention to erect 3 walls to enclose the cave entrance, leaving a singular entrance 2 meters wide facing the east. The perimeter wall was built directly from blue bricks. In this freezing weather, one only needed to pour water over the masonry to bond it together. When the weather warms in the coming spring and the ice melts, these bricks can be reclaimed to build the main city walls, ensuring absolutely no waste of resources. For the following days, all the adults of your tribe labored in unison. The height of the defensive wall rose with remarkable speed, visible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, in the Black Rat tribe, Shuda was using the ceramic pot he had traded for to simmer meat soup, recounting to the elder everything he had witnessed and obtained during this diplomatic excursion. Upon hearing this, the Black Rat shaman decided that he must personally pay your tribe a visit. While back at your tribe, the makeshift defensive wall reached completion. The wall stood 3 meters high and nearly half a meter thick, sufficient to thwart any human assault. With the ice brick wall finished, defensive weaponry naturally had to be prepared. Previously, the weapons carried by the tribesmen were mostly copper shovels. While they could serve as armaments, they were only effective in close-quarters combat. However, close-quarters combat frequently results in casualties, which is why long-range weaponry has become the primary focus of development. After careful consideration, throwing spears remain the most reliable choice. As long as they strike their mark, the target will surely be unable to crawl away, if not outright killed. In the past, the throwing spears of his tribe were all crafted from wood, lacking sufficient piercing power and durability. But now you possess hundreds of caddies of gold and silver plates, so you need only attach metallic spearheads to the wooden shafts. The forging of these spearheads is a simple process. You craft a prototype with your own hands, then entrust the remaining work to Muto and Mujuan. By the fourth day, 260 of the new throwing spears had been produced. Now with the defensive walls and the throwing spears, you can finally set your mind at ease. Even if the enemy numbers fewer than 20, with over 60 adults in his tribe, a single volley of spears would be enough to annihilate them entirely. At this moment, Shudai leads the tribesmen across the small river, yet they cannot find the entrance to his tribe's cave. Instead, where there was only an empty plot of land just days ago, a white and blue icy wall has suddenly emerged. Shudai quickly runs to the wall. It was not here a few days ago. Could it have sprung from the earth itself? Chuwu follows closely behind. Upon seeing this wall, he cannot help but exclaim that it is truly a divine miracle. Rubao, who is playing inside the enclosure, is drawn by the noise and darts to the gate to peer outside. Seeing the group that had attacked him with long spears previously, he pokes his snout out and lets out a ferocious roar. Only then does Shudai notice that this wall actually has a gate, though the exterior of the wooden frame is lined with sturdy sharpened wooden spears. Although he does not know the intended purpose of this structure, he can still imagine the scene of an enemy charging forward, only to be impaled by the sharp points, and he cannot help but click his tongue and marvel. The women and children, meanwhile, wonder why their tribe does not simply consume the four-legged beast. Think of how much meat that would provide. Hearing Rubao's roar, you lead more than 10 tribesmen out of the cave, each one gripping a new model of the throwing spear. Chudai hurriedly explains that he has come to trade pottery, gesturing for the women and children behind him to step forward for you to see. You nod, and only then do you signal your subordinates to open the barrier. Once Chudai's party enters, they are immediately stunned by the sight before them. There, beside the livestock pen, beside the cave entrance stood 50 bronze shovels, over 200 javelins, and rows of neatly arranged spearheads that shimmered with a golden luster. Upon reaching the cave entrance inside the pen, Ma Ling, who was grazing in the shelter, neighed loudly at the sight of strangers. Shudai and his companions were instantly startled by the sound. Even after entering the cave, the members of the Shudai party had yet to regain their composure. Once inside, a single glance was enough to reveal people everywhere. It was clear there were no fewer than the members of the Kithu tribe. The tribesmen of your tribe were observing them in return. Shudai stared at the 180 pottery cauldrons beside the hearth, completely dumbstruck. There were enough here to trade for his entire tribe. A woman from the Kithu tribe turned her attention to the women of your tribe. Everyone looked radiant, clearly showing they had not been suffering from hunger. Furthermore, every single one of them was clothed in animal skins. Only the shaman of the Kethu tribe possessed the true insight to observe properly. He remained transfixed, staring blankly at the hundreds of Chinese characters etched onto the cave wall. Seeing the old man's fascination with the characters, you chose not to disturb him. You instructed the elder to handle the trade with Shudai first. This time, Shudai had brought 7 women, 6 boys around 11 or 12 years of age, and 4 baskets of peanuts. He intended to trade for 10 pottery basins and 4 pottery bowls. Upon receiving the pottery, Shudai was overjoyed. From now on, his tribesmen would finally be able to drink hot, thick soup. Yet those even happier were the boys and women being traded. Your tribe appeared truly formidable. Thinking that they might one day be like the others here, and no longer have to suffer from hunger, they were all filled with excitement. When the Kithu shaman saw that the trade was complete, he hurried to your side to ask what those Chinese characters represented. His intuition told him that these symbols possessed profound wisdom. Seeing his genuine interest, you picked up a small branch and explained them to him in great detail. It was then that the Kethu shaman realized these symbols were merely another form of expressing the language of your tribe. If everyone could learn these symbols, would it not mean that one could simply write them down for others to see exactly what was being said? You were unaware of the old man's internal musings, but seeing him deep in thought, you did not disturb him. Do not be misled by the fact that your own tribesmen study these characters every day. That is done purely for the sake of those honey-roasted chestnuts. Aside from him, you had yet to find another person capable of pondering and contemplating such things on their own. In that moment, you felt a sense of appreciation for his intellect, even if he were only an elder from another tribe. Once matters were settled, you took the initiative to invite the Kethu shaman and Shudai to stay the night. Unexpectedly, upon hearing your invitation, the Kithu shaman agreed with refreshing readiness. The old man still had many questions he wished to discuss with you. To offer a proper welcome, you announce that there will be an extra meal today, but since everyone is sleeping inside the cave, there is clearly not enough space. Therefore, you prepare to move the rabbits to an open area outside the cave to free up more room inside. You select a location and immediately set the tribesmen to work. Using green bricks to build 4 walls and paving the floor, you then spread a thick layer of dried grass, and the job is complete. The women carry over 50 rabbits out to the new enclosure. Ziwu takes the initiative to ask, "Why do you not simply slaughter these rabbits? These are all meant to be food, are they not?" Before you can even respond, Dashu hurriedly offers an explanation. He speaks of your purpose in breeding the rabbits. He has witnessed firsthand their reproduction, watching the population surge from 30 to over 50. Breeding them now is far easier than the arduous task of hunting them in the wild. The members of the Black Rat tribe are astonished upon hearing this. The principles of animal husbandry are simple enough for them to grasp, yet they never imagined it was possible to stockpile food in such a manner. As for the rat shaman, he harbors secret speculations regarding the miraculous nature of your tribe. He stealthily pulls you aside into a corner and asks in a low voice, "Who taught you these things? Is it the god of your tribe?" You state bluntly that your tribe has no god and that this knowledge was innate to you from the moment of your birth. Upon hearing this, the expression in the rat shaman's eyes shifts immediately. Could it be that you are a god yourself? Ignoring his peculiar gaze, you lead the group to tour the rice paddies that are being cultivated. Tu-Hao tells him that by next year they will have more food than they could ever consume. Shudai hears this and remains somewhat skeptical. Although your tribe is more powerful than his own, such a small number of people could not possibly consume that much food. After walking around for some time, he finally addresses the core issue. You smile and tell him that you intend to invite other tribes to join yours. Shudai expresses his disagreement, stating that no tribe would willingly submit and join another just like that. Hearing this, you offer a cold smile and summon Dashu to your side, instructing him to recount what they have endured. Because Dashu witnessed the invasion of the cannibalistic tribe firsthand, his account is so vivid that it makes the listeners feel as though they were experiencing the ordeal themselves. Shudai breaks into a cold sweat while listening, never imagining such a cruel tribe existed, and feeling fortunate that his own people had not yet crossed paths with them. Sensing that the time is ripe, you drop another earth-shattering piece of news. That cannibalistic tribe resides just on the other side of the river, and they possess a great number of fully grown warriors. Each group appearing consists of no fewer than 50 individuals, accompanied by many long-nosed monsters as massive as Hoisin. They may very well be stationed not far from your tribe, so I urge you to remain vigilant. Having said this, you pat Shudai on the shoulder before turning to walk back inside the city walls. Both Shuwu and Shudai were deeply shaken by this revelation. Knowing that a tribe of man-eaters lurked so close to their own, how could they possibly remain as guests with peace of mind? They immediately sought you out to bid farewell, stating they had to return to prepare their defenses. Since they were determined to leave, there was no need for you to persuade them otherwise. You gifted them 10 large fish to serve as provisions for their journey. Upon parting, you assured Shuwu that should they ever face danger, they were welcome to return here to seek your aid. Moved beyond measure, Shuwu and Shudai offered endless thanks before leading their tribesmen in a hurried retreat toward their homeland. As their party departed, your tribe returned to its customary tranquility. Just before the third full moon of winter, snow fell continuously for an entire day and night. The accumulation on the open ground reached 30 centimeters, forcing the brick-firing operations to cease. That day you were reclining on a pile of hay by a tree, shelling chestnuts while Bao and Hoisin rested at your sides, seizing any moment you were distracted to steal a few morsels. Suddenly, Hoisin lifted his head, flicking his large ears as he strained to listen to movements in the distance. Sensing something amiss, you immediately ceased your movements. Less than a minute later, a violent tremor rippled through the earth. You rushed out of the livestock enclosure and climbed atop the western wall to survey the situation. At the edge of the western forest, a massive hunting party composed of countless predatory beasts stretched across the snow-covered plains. They were in desperate pursuit of a herd of herbivores which were fleeing for their lives. There were not only bison, which you had never encountered before, but also giant horned deer, creatures you had only ever seen in museums. Mingled within the hunting party were even dozens of legendary beasts, the alpaca. As for the predators in pursuit, they were not merely the towering terror birds, but also a dense pack of wild boars. Yet, within this hunting force, they were considered nothing more than trivial nuisances running about for sport. The true core of this army was a pack of gray wolves numbering over 200. The hunting party was now hot on their prey's heels. The lead bull, followed by over 100 subordinates, exhausted themselves as they fled toward the northeast. The alpha wolf behind them led over 100 starving wolves, moving with the speed of a gale as they flanked the herd. The herd ran and ran until they reached the banks of the man-made river. The sight before them caused the entire herd of wild oxen to bristle with alarm. Damnation, since when had such a long and deep trench appeared here? The alpha ox was on the verge of madness. It knew the trench ahead could certainly not be crossed, so it had no choice but to halt abruptly, standing in a horizontal line with its sharp horns pointed outward. The wolves bared their fangs and wrinkled their noses, closing the distance step by step to tighten their encirclement. Just as the great battle was about to erupt, a resounding fart shattered the silence before the clash. Both the herd of oxen and the pack of wolves were momentarily stunned. Hundreds of curious eyes turned in unison toward the wall to the west, only to see you using your hand to strike the head of a terror bird beside you repeatedly. I gave you these chestnuts to snack on, and now you have brought death upon us both. The wild oxen staring in this direction suddenly brightened, for there was no trench in the area near the wall. The wolves' eyes also lit up, for they had discovered prey even easier to hunt than the herd of oxen. You suddenly noticed the strange look in their eyes and immediately bolted toward the cave, shouting as you ran, clutching your weapon to secure the cave entrance. The wall could no longer be relied upon for protection. The brick wall was 1/2 meter thick and 3 meters high, which was sufficient to defend against human attacks, but whether it could withstand a crazed herd of wild oxen was another matter entirely. The herd of wild oxen understood nothing of your words. They led the charge, their primary target being your location. Seeing the oxen break through, the alpha wolf hastily ordered its subordinates to drive the wild boars forward, initiating the first wave of counterattacks. 7 wild boars immediately rushed to the front line. This was an unavoidable necessity as their numbers could not compare to the others.